There's a darkness at the heart of Clannad, a bleak conclusion, hidden under the wholesome moments of family and connection. You can find its tendrils infecting other routes, but it's only an AfterStory that comes into stark focus, a dread that infects both Okazuki and the work itself. And this unexpected darkness, to me, is the most interesting aspect of Clannad, but it's also an element that undermines every emotional moment and supposed happy ending in the series. Because as I'll argue, it's never fully resolved. It's a core part not only of the VN's characters, but a subtle nihilism inherent to the VN's entire worldview. Because at the heart of AfterStory is an exploration about what gives life meaning, what makes life worth living. And it should come as no surprise that the VN's main answers are relationships and our family. But if you pay close attention to how Clannad depicts these themes, you'll discover it's not that straightforward. Because in both text and subtext, there's an aspect of how Clannad depicts relationships that's superficial and transactional. We've already seen hints of this perspective in Nagisa Route, and how it's tied to the series' misogyny, with V and Okazuki's attitude towards Nagisa sharply changing the instant they begin dating, becoming immediately less interested in her goals and feelings, and beginning to value her more for the role she provides. A cute girl at his side that allows him to fulfill his fantasy of stereotypical dates and making the other boys jealous. But how will this mindset affect Okazuki as the relationship progresses, and he finds it's the only thing that gives his life meaning? What's the implication when the VN presents family as the only thing worth living for, but reduces family down to the base social benefits of fitting into traditional nuclear roles, human connections and emotional bonds be damned? And while I find the VN's conclusion to these questions ultimately unsatisfying and a little distressing, its exploration of these themes is complex and fascinating, providing some of its most dynamic writing. These nuances are, of course, not present in the anime. This didn't come as a surprise. With each route, we've seen the anime reduce its characters' internal complexity, and remove much of the original thematic depth. To be clear, this isn't even a real criticism. Any adaptation from one medium to another has to make hard decisions, make trade-offs, about what elements of the original work to keep and which to leave behind. Of course, even great content had to be cut when going from a visual novel, which has no real limit on length, to an anime with a strict episode limit. In transitioning from a written, first-person narrative, where we as readers have total access to Okazuki's thoughts and feelings, to a third-person perspective in the anime, it makes total sense to flatten his internal complexity and conflicts, and instead focus on what the medium excels at, expressing that personality in fantastic visual ways. These are all choices KyoAni had to make when adapting Clannad, and on the whole, I think they made fantastically smart decisions, but that doesn't mean these choices didn't have trade-offs. The point of these videos has always been not to criticize, but to explore those choices. What decisions did the anime make, and how do those choices affect a viewer's understanding of the characters and story? What elements were made more effective by the transition, and what did it choose to sacrifice and leave behind? So I'm not criticizing the anime when I say I thought it had ignored V and Okazuki's search for meaning and the darkly fascinating thematic exploration that came with it, to instead focus on a more straightforward narrative about family. That was until I rewatched the anime's one-episode bonus OVA adapting Tomoyo Route. It's not connected to the main narrative or anything, but I figured it was worth a watch as part of this comparison to see what, if anything, the anime bothered to change. But what I found was a revelation. It's subtle, but the anime doesn't just cut content from Tomoyo Route, it adds to it, and by doing so subtly twists the bleaker undercurrents also present in that route on its head, presenting the same plot beats but a markedly different tone. And as I continued this comparison, I found more such occurrences. Tiny tweaks in addition that confirm my insane theory. KyoAni hadn't just ignored this dark subtext or cut it for time, they'd surgically removed it, like a cancer. This small revelation makes the comparison infinitely more interesting. For one, it confirms my thesis, that there is an unresolved bleak darkness to the visual novel's narrative and worldview, because the anime staff also had to have noticed it to remove it so completely and specifically. But more fascinating, it means this content wasn't removed entirely as a pragmatic time-saving measure. It was the anime saying something, responding to the VN's original themes and message by presenting its own conclusion on why family is important and on what makes life worth living. And while it may lack the VN's complexity, it might just be the anime that provides the more compelling, more human answer to these questions, depicting relationships and life as meaningful unto itself. But before we can wrestle with the two works' competing themes and their answers to what makes life meaningful, we first have to answer one simple question. What even is an AfterStory? Upon completing the good ending for all main routes, sorry Ryo, and collecting 8 balls of light, a new AfterStory option appears in the VN's menu. Selecting this kicks off AfterStory, a longer than normal route continuing from Nagisa's arc. Like the main game, it has unlockable arcs and branching paths, based on your choices in both AfterStory and in your prior playthrough of Nagisa Route. But unlike the base game, which branches out into widely diverging routes like spokes on a wheel, AfterStory follows a largely linear timeline. The unlockable content is simply inserted if you've made the requisite choices, then the story continues on as before. If not, you simply skip past the lock content. And like the base game, getting a good ending for these arcs grants a ball of light, the collection of which is required to unlock the true ending. Your first playthrough includes the unlockable Sanae and Yoshino arcs, before reaching a guaranteed bad ending, which unlocks Akio Route on your next playthrough, which actually does branch off into its own ending. Assuming you've made all the right choices and collected 13 balls of light across both AfterStory and the main game, a third and final playthrough grants you AfterStory's final, true ending. This complexity is, of course, not required in the anime, where AfterStory simply continues on from the main narrative in episode 10. And even with 13 episodes, there's plenty of cuts. Neither Akio or Sanae Route is adapted, and about half of Yoshino Route is cut. But to discuss that, we'll have to dive into our final comparison. See you on the other side. Both versions of Nagisa Route end with her falling sick and failing to graduate, leaving Okazuki to face the real world alone. The timeline and duration the couple had together at school was greatly expanded in the anime to fit in all the other routes, but this doesn't really affect the following events. The anime does at least lampshade it, with Okazuki commenting that despite having helped so many people, he hasn't grown any more mature. Both versions of AfterStory then start with an illusionary world cutaway, before we meet Okazuki the day after graduation. However, this is effectively the VN's final cutaway, showing the girl and the robot slowly making their way through the snow, walking towards the promised warm place. The anime has been adapting these sequences at a slower pace, and will continue to spread them throughout AfterStory, here showing the girl first collapsing from the cold, while they work on an ultimately futile flying machine to escape. The VN begins with a tiny flash forward to Okazuki working in the Furukawa bakery, discussing his panda apron, which has actually made an appearance in the anime already. The anime instead has Okazuki wake up and look at his uniform, before remembering that that stage of his life is over. Both versions then cut to Okazuki discussing his situation with Nagisa's parents. Okazuki doesn't have plans in either version, but comes off as even more hopeless in the VN. Either way, Akio and Sanae offer him a job at the bakery to tide him over. The anime also moves Sanae asking to call Okazuki by his first name here, a move that shows her now accepting him as an adult. We also get a small added anime moment where Okazuki talks with a still recovering Nagisa, mentioning he doesn't want to keep relying on her parents, and that he hopes she'll be in the same class as Tomoyo or Yukine, friends she doesn't have at the VN. We then get a montage of Okazuki's new life helping the bakery, combined with Nagisa's first day at school in the anime. Okazuki now also giving Nagisa a see you later. The VN has Nagisa return home with an upbeat expression, only for Okazuki to discover her sullen in her room, hugging onto a stuffed dango. The anime instead combines the following discussion with a separate conversation held after the drama club orientation, where Nagisa mentions none of her friends, the choir girls, plus Yukine and Tomoyo in the anime, are in her class, and there's already rumors about her repeating. To make things worse, the drama club's new advisor doesn't care about the club, and it's again at risk at closing without 3 members. We get a montage of Nagisa failing in both versions, but sometimes less is more. Instead of getting a day-by-day report, the anime cuts from Okazuki enthusiastically asking to hear about all the fun things at school, to him revealing Nagisa never shared anything after that. In the end, no one wanted to join the drama club, this failure spurring V and Okazuki to decide he needs to be the one to protect Nagisa. Sometime later, Okazuki runs into Yoshino working as he leaves the house. They're well introduced in the anime and chat, referencing to Buki and Fuko, while in the VN Yoshino barely recognizes him. V and Okazuki thinks back to an unadapted sequence where he helped Yoshino with a job, as well as the money it paid, and immediately asked to join his company. This is how your parents think job hunting works. If you never ran into Yoshino during Nagisa Route, the sequence plays out slightly differently, with Yoshino introducing himself and asking for Okazuki's help with a quick job. As in their pre-AfterStory encounter, Okazuki's impressed by both the pay and physical exhaustion, and recognizing his current life is too comfortable, he immediately asks for a job. The anime instead has Okazuki depart to look for an apartment, where he runs into an appreciated cameo with the Fujibayashis out shopping. Both are underway pursuing their careers, and further spurred on by Ryo's recommendation of a cheap unit going up for rent, Okazuki sprints back to ask Yoshino for a job. Yoshino accepts his request, leading to a cute reaction from V and Okazuki as he immediately runs to tell Nagisa. She mentions it will be lonely all alone, and it's here we get the first major split in the plots. V and Okazuki ask her to come with. It's also where we see V and Okazuki's potentially concerning quest for meaning take root, as he decides protecting Nagisa with his own strength will now be his sole reason to live. It's here V and Okazuki goes apartment shopping, touring a dingy but affordable unit with Nagisa. We instead see Okazuki telling the whole family in the anime, but his Vian counterpart faces a uniquely patriarchal problem, as he decides he needs to petition Akio for permission to take his daughter away. This sequence highlights the traditionally patriarchal way the Vian views relationships. These moments aren't particularly egregious, but we can begin to see how Vian Okazuki views Nagisa as more of an object to possess than as a partner or equal in the relationship, thinking in terms of taking and protecting her. Regardless, Okazuki humorously struggles to find a moment where Akio isn't distracted or upset, but upon seeing how much joy Akio's seemingly childish behavior brings his neighbors, Okazuki works up the courage, declaring he also wants to make others smile like that, and asking if he can take Nagisa with him. The anime cuts the prelude, but has Okazuki ask Akio the same question. I'm not entirely sure why, since he appends "someday" to the end, making it largely pointless. V and Akio references the promise he and Sanae made to never leave Nagisa's side, but like in the anime admit she's grown up and it's her choice now. V and Akio is also surprisingly responsible, making Okazuki promise to visit every weekend and to immediately call Sanae if Nagisa again falls sick. And with that out of the way, it's time for the big move. Akio, Nagisa, and Okazuki all pitching in. Akio ditches the pair, and Okazuki's suddenly nervous with just the two of them alone, an even more understandable reaction in the Vian, given it's for good. And thus begins the cohabitation arc, one of my favorite parts of the Vian, as Okazuki and Nagisa's relationship goes from an, albeit cute, high school romance, to two people figuring out how to live with each other. Anime and Nagisa will pop in with constant visits, but the pair don't move in until they're married. In the very same episode Nagisa falls pregnant, meaning we almost entirely miss out on this dynamic. It's an odd choice as I can't imagine it saved much runtime. The same plot points happen regardless. My only hypothesis is that KyoAni saw it as somehow taboo to have the pair living together while Nagisa is still in high school. And while yes, I admit that is an uncomfortable situation, especially if Nagisa is already dealing with rumors at school, the girl's 20 for God's sake. But it's juicy content and satisfying relationship development we lose out on. In a way, AfterStory is about maturing and growing into a family, and this first section of the Vian is an important part of that journey. The Vian pair begin their new life with a sequence the anime also adopts when Nagisa moves in after their marriage. The two exchange vows, with Nagisa promising not to cry no matter how difficult things get, only allowing herself to cry during happy moments. It's a vow that sets up the challenges the couple will face in the coming years, making it more meaningful here at the start of their journey compared to its later inclusion in the anime. Instead, anime Nagisa stays just for dinner, before Okazuki walks her home and she asks if he's told his dad about the move. It's an uncomfortable moment for Okazuki, but a great reminder of a paternal relationship that's core to the series' conclusion. Either way, both Okazukis fall asleep to an unfamiliar ceiling. Anime Okazuki with the unfortunately more relatable experience of living all alone for the first time, while his Vian counterpart instead wonders if the two of them are really grown up yet or just playing house. But both are still unknowingly immature. Anime Okazuki expressing his desire to no longer rely on anyone else, a more significant vow in the Vian due to it instead being a promise the pair make to each other, to rely only on one another for the upcoming year. This is a significant declaration in the Vian, as the pair will time and again come to find the promise tested. But Okazuki doesn't have time to ruminate on his changing life. His new job starts the very next morning. His anime incarnation is oddly made irresponsible, requiring Nagisa to stop by on her way to school and catch him oversleeping. It's also worth noting the anime continues its massive visual upgrade over the last season. Now that it's finally accompanying a relevant plot, the entire show is elevated to an insane level. For instance, this episode uses background characters, first a group of students in familiar jackets, then commuters in suit jackets, to highlight Okazuki's initial lack of place being out of school, before he decides to become part of society and head to work. I don't have time to call out all the anime's fantastic visual additions, so assume there's a dozen or so visual additions per episode that beautifully reinforce the narratives and themes. Okazuki's nervous entering the workplace for the first time, but no one else pays him mind, Yoshino introducing him to the boss and driving him out to his first job. As they drive, Yoshino expresses the same change we've been seeing, commenting Okazuki no longer seems like a mere child, but a child fighting with everything they have to become an adult. Okazuki might not like the characterization, but as Yoshino points out, it's a massive difference. But it's time for Okazuki's trial by fire, the Vian of course adding more technical details. Yoshino is stricter than we've ever seen him, and a similar lesson is delivered in both, in the Vian due to Okazuki failing to tighten a nut, while in the anime it's caused by him fumbling and dropping a wrench. Yoshino scolds him, stressing the consequences of their job as he asks how Okazuki would feel if someone he cared about had been standing below and had been hurt by his negligence. Okazuki returns home too exhausted to pay attention to Nagisa as they eat, who in the anime continues to visit each evening. Anime Nagisa talks about school, while the VN again returns to its focus on purpose, Nagisa congratulating Okazuki on becoming a member of society, while Okazuki wonders if he'd be able to work this hard if it wasn't for Nagisa. It's another innocuous comment that belies the bleaker side to Clannad's philosophy, because it reveals Okazuki hasn't actually found any meaning in life after graduation. It's the act of suffering for someone else's sake he finds meaningful. And while that's admirable, it's a clearly dangerous mindset when self-sacrifice is the only reason you can find for living. Instead of finding purpose in the work itself or the community, or, since plenty of us work crappy jobs we don't find any meaning in, finding purpose in literally any hobbies or relationships formed during his time off. Okazuki's sore from the first day, but the work continues regardless, the VN including a small cut moment where Yoshino commiserates with him about how bad his first day was and offers a warm compress. The anime instead adds a great detail of Okazuki's work tag, starting as a temporary one before it's later replaced with a permanent tag, though one markedly less worn than his coworkers. He's becoming part of this community. But each version's differing living situations now causes a plot divergence. In the anime we simply get Nagisa expressing how lonely Okazuki must be living alone, while in the VN it's time for their first agreed upon weekend home visit. Both parents of course unleash over-dramatic reactions to Nagisa's return, before Sanae drops the bomb that Akio's been sexually harassing her now that they're all alone. A hell of a reveal, until she clarifies he's just been flipping her skirt. This leads to a misunderstanding where Nagisa accidentally implies Okazuki's impotent. You're given the choice to clarify, but that leads to them assuming Nagisa's the impotent one. Either way, it gets cleared up, resulting in an arguably more awkward situation where Akio heartily encourages Okazuki to go for it with his daughter. But Nagisa's smiling despite the chaos, and we see how the VN's perspective on relationships might be a bit skewed as Okazuki finds himself depressed by this, feeling inadequate he's not providing her the same joy at home. It's half understandable, but it's another small detail that convinces me Okazuki's interest is more superficial than pure, seeing his girlfriend's happiness as a contest rather than a goal. But despite this, and previous weird horny tangents, it's here we get maybe one of the VN's biggest surprises, a genuine arc of Okazuki and Nagisa discussing their physical needs and boundaries. It gets a little silly later on, but it's legitimately phenomenal to see it brought up in such a touching way, as the two begin to develop their own patterns of physical intimacy. Nagisa apologizes for the implication of her comment, clarifying she's not opposed to those things. You have the choice to deny your interest, but staying silent, Nagisa decides she needs to take the lead as the older partner, causing Okazuki to burst out laughing as she ends up unable to go further than pressing herself close against him. But he is as happy as he's ever been, only undercut by him again requesting Nagisa to blow over his ear, which I have to assume is either some Japanese cultural thing or one of the writer's poorly disguised fetishes. We follow Okazuki at work in both versions, slowly getting more responsibilities and warming up to his coworkers. As becomes a trend, the VN is surprisingly detailed, describing the nuances of Okazuki's work. We also see VN Okazuki's continuing failure to find any purpose in life as he has a day off and admits he has no hobbies or interests, finding literally nothing to do when not working or with Nagisa. Here also continues a trend of small choices in the VN where Okazuki wonders if he should perv on Nagisa or not, in this case giving you the choice to search through her drawers or be normal. You might think I'd again criticize this for being weirdly horny, but I actually like that a few of these scenarios come up. Presenting it as a choice to the player directly conveys Okazuki's temptations living with a girlfriend for the first time. It's a part of the process of learning to live together. And fortunately, the horny choices result in nothing happening, besides Okazuki feeling disappointed in himself. Not that I checked or anything. Even more than the first season, we can see each version of Okazuki beginning to diverge, characterized by the next scene where Okazuki uses Yoshino's digital camera and cell phone to help at work. In the anime, Okazuki is largely impressed by these new, high-tech inventions, but we can already see via Okazuki's perspective on change, well, changing, as he admits the new tech is useful, but finds himself sad at the update for some reason. The anime also sprinkles in a bunch of new setup here, with Okazuki running into one of his dad's old friends from work, and Yoshino mentioning a hospital is planned to be built soon. The AfterStory tends to jump from one topic to the next. We spend time on Nagisa at school, before leaving it behind to solely focus on Okazuki at work, before leaving that behind to move on to the next thing. By contrast, the anime weaves a more natural narrative by adding this additional setup and by interleaving some of these events, such as occasionally cutting to Nagisa's lonely situation at school, content the VN no longer acknowledges after the pair moves out, despite her situation assumedly continuing. Our next shared moment of setup is Nagisa inviting Okazuki to the Founders Festival, despite his warning they're busy at work and he may not make it. It's a small change, but the anime makes the context more charming by having Nagisa bring it up when Okazuki suggests going on a date over the weekend, while in the VN she brings it up while he's spacing out at dinner, thinking about work. While small on the surface, it's another example of a tiny change that notably alters the tone of the pair's relationship, and is why I end Clannad convinced that anime Okazuki cares and pays attention to Nagisa on an emotional level his VN counterpart really doesn't. Okazuki has the following day off in both versions. The VN shows him watching TV and copying a fried rice recipe from a cooking show before Akio barges in and comments it needs more pepper, more bitterness, an innocuous comment that insanely sets up for a far later moment with Ushio. The anime skips this preamble and cuts to Akio and Okazuki headed for a toy shop, Akio having recruited Okazuki to sneak a plastic spider down his wife's blouse. The anime improves this gag in two ways. One, by removing Akio's creepy clarification the goal isn't to scare Sanae, but an attempt to get her to strip, and two, by changing her fear from generic arachnophobia to the hilariously specific fear of the Bengal monitor lizard. Either way, their antics conclude with Okazuki now joining Akio and chasing Sanae through the neighborhood, trying to calm her down. It's a ridiculous gag, but as Nagisa points out in both versions, it's the first time anyone's ran with their parents. His relationship to them is changing, becoming less of a child and more of an equal. Another great relationship moment in both versions is the openness Okazuki and Nagisa have discussing him trying to make it to the Founders Festival, but accepting it might not work out. This increased workload is foreshadowed by Okazuki being roped in to help his boss with paperwork, which additionally sets up for his upcoming job offer. As Okazuki's work responsibilities increase, we also get Yoshino confronting him over his bum arm. Okazuki's afraid he's about to be fired, but Yoshino concludes he's finishing all his assigned tasks, so it's not an issue, before regurgitating one of his speeches about supporting each other. This time it succeeds in bringing Okazuki to tears. The VN follows this up with Yoshino finally complimenting Okazuki, causing him to ruminate that while his former classmates are still studying, he's forged a place for himself with his own hands. The anime moves this comment to after the Founders Festival, but it loses context. The VN is building up an arc of Okazuki gaining confidence and responsibility right before it's about to be toppled down. It's a plot structure the VN loves to employ, but its effect here, as elsewhere, is undermined by the anime's reshuffling. This increased responsibility concludes with Okazuki's first solo job. In the VN because Yoshino's already out on another project when Okazuki arrives for work, while in the anime the boss remembers a small forgotten job while Okazuki's staying overtime to help him with paperwork. It's an all-day job in the VN, including a cool detail where the lights actually come on in the background as Okazuki finishes, highlighting the tangible change he's having on the town. By the way, Yoshino arrives as Okazuki finishes to inspect the work. VN Yoshino clearly realizes something's wrong, but plays it off, while anime Yoshino seems legitimately satisfied, clarifying the next day he only noticed something was wrong after Okazuki left. It's a small change that makes Yoshino's actions more relatable in the anime, as the next day, the day Okazuki took off for the Founders Festival, his boss calls, saying Yoshino ran off that morning to fix something, and asks Okazuki if he knows anything. Either way, Okazuki knows Yoshino is covering for his mistake, and runs to the site. Okazuki begs to help, Yoshino giving significantly more pushback in the VN, insisting Okazuki's job is to be with his girlfriend and make her happy. Only via Okazuki's insistence they wouldn't be able to enjoy their time off together if Okazuki knew he'd failed to take responsibility for his mistake, convinces Yoshino to accept his help. It's dusk when the job is finished and Okazuki returns to the Founders Festival. It's already over, but Nagisa saved him a snack and they eat together. I mentioned it in my Nagisa video, but I appreciate the anime increasing her self-confidence just a bit. In the VN, despite being the most selfless GF ever, she repeatedly reproaches herself as selfish for wanting this simple date, which comes off as legitimately unhealthy. Someone get this girl a therapist. Okazuki returns to work sullen, wondering if he'll be punished, but is instead congratulated by his coworkers. As Yoshino explains, everyone makes mistakes. What matters is how you handle it. Similar to my comment with Nagisa, I also like how the anime tones back on Okazuki's weird penitence here, as well as adding his coworkers reacting with exasperation when Yoshino starts his big support each other speech. You know they've heard it 100 times already. It's here the VN transitions into a series of side routes, first either Sanae or Akio arc, followed by Yoshino route. The anime fully skips both Furukawa's arcs, and pushes Yoshino's back until after Okazuki's job offer. As previously mentioned, all three of these arcs are required for unlocking the VN's good ending, but are missable depending on your choices in both this and Nagisa route. But assuming you've made the right choices, this kicks off with our young couple's next weekend visit to the bakery, when Nagisa mentions her dad's high school theater troupe is touring a few towns over. At first, I thought this might be a follow-up to Nagisa's comment during her route that despite her theatrical interest, she's never seen a play in person. This was a foolish assumption, given Clannad's main characters aren't allowed to have interests or hobbies after high school, and Nagisa's motivation is to instead allow her dad to visit his high school buds, asking Okazuki if he can watch the store while he's gone. It's your response to this question, accepting or rejecting Nagisa's request, that determines if you go down Akio or Sanae route. Akio arc has the more compelling moments, but also fully diverges from the main route in a legitimately bizarre ending. The thesis of this route is Okazuki realizing how much of a gym the old man is, despite his irreverent personality, which is compelling, and how this personality causes worries for Sanae, which is somewhat less so. Akio route begins with a charming throwback to Okazuki's post-graduation work, as he finds himself again working at the bakery. Another cute throwback includes the couple again working the register together, a throwback to Mei's visit. V and Nagisa again being written a little too wish-fulfillment-y as they discuss first crushes, and she admits Okazuki is somehow the first person she ever fell for. Conveniently a late bloomer indeed. This isn't reciprocated though, as Okazuki mentions his first crush was on his teacher while he was in elementary school, leading to Nagisa humorously identifying she fits his trend of falling for older women. While Okazuki works, he begins to realize how much Akio contributes to the neighborhood, playing with and being a model for the neighborhood boys, as well as helping their neighbors with miscellaneous tasks, and he slowly begins to step into that role as well. We also get an adorable scene of the pair again spending the night at the Furukawas, for the first time in a shared room. They begin to get a little too close in the morning when Sanae enters, immediately closing the door to give them privacy, which of course leads them to get ready ASAP to prevent any further misunderstandings. The downfall of this route is the ending, which jumps the shark by having them see a news report about Akio being stabbed by a bus hijacker, but he's such a nice guy he attempts to help the hijacker until he passes out from blood loss. Even barely surviving in the hospital, he sneaks away to be helpful, despite the clear distress it causes Sanae. It might not be the most compelling content, but it is a legitimate conflict between our likable parents. Unfortunately, it isn't really concluded, with Akio just generically promising Sanae he won't run away anymore, and credits roll. Honestly, the arc's first half is pretty great. We get a fun collection of cute couple moments and nostalgic throwbacks, combined with Okazuki beginning to realize what it means to be a contributing member of society, now that he's no longer a kid. But the conclusion is so absurd and dissimilar from the rest of Clannad's content, it doesn't work for me. And speaking of absurd content, let's talk about Sanae Route. Her arc is more in line with AfterStory's other content, not leading to a separate ending, but simply returning to AfterStory's main plotline upon its conclusion. The main conflict here is one of Sanae's old students returning to open a cram school, asking Sanae to let her students go there. She loves teaching, but knows it will be better for the kids, so can't refuse. This leads to Okazuki and Nagisa trying and failing to get the students' support, who all love Sanae but want to respect her decision, as well as Okazuki repeatedly visiting Sanae on his breaks, their interactions getting increasingly flirty each time. It's a dynamic I usually enjoy, but it escalates way too far in this route, ending with them confessing their love and embracing. I don't know if it's better or worse that Sanae at least approaches it with some level of maternal concern, asking about Okazuki's mother, which he despicably takes advantage of by saying he doesn't remember much, except she always kissed him. Fortunately, this isn't a hentai, so using his dead mom as a pickup line on his girlfriend's mom doesn't work as well as he hoped, but she does give Okazuki a kiss on the nose. The only enjoyable part of this is the hilarious escalation of Yoshino appearing, assuming Okazuki must have been running off on his lunch break all this time to meet up with his girlfriend, and leading into his whole spiel about how important a woman's love is to a man, before they have to clarify Sanae isn't Okazuki's girlfriend, she's his girlfriend's mom. Yoshino withdraws, and Okazuki admits work is probably not going to be enjoyable for the foreseeable future. Finally, the arc ends with a functional but flat conclusion, with Sanae seeing off the kids before Akio appears and encourages Sanae to do what she wants. She does, and the kids all run back, Okazuki realizing his MILF hunting was in vain. Akio truly is the only man who can support Sanae. The VN immediately transitions into Yoshino Route, but the anime pulls forward another Furukawa house visit, where Akio complains about being lonely, a more understandable position in the VN, and proposes a family beach barbecue. VN Akio again uncomfortably criticizes Okazuki for not banging his daughter yet, clarifying Sanae was already pregnant with Nagisa at her age. Sympathetic to Okazuki's plight, Akio gives him some dirty mags, but Nagisa's penchant for sniffing out lies discovers them, leading Okazuki to decide they're better off in the trash anyways. It's humorous, but also continues to add a genuinely compelling angle to the pair's relationship, as the two again discuss their physical needs and boundaries. Nagisa chickens out in the end, but overall it's a nice sequence, assuming we entirely ignore Akio's alternative gift offer. As the anime pair walks home, it adapts a conversation that happens immediately after Yoshino Route in the VN. Nagisa prepares to ask Okazuki a question, tone serious, but he intercepts, joking about getting her a new swimsuit. Nagisa's briefly distracted, but refocuses to our original goal, asking about visiting Okazuki's dad. Okazuki's clearly been doing his best to ignore his father, and is crushed. In the VN he even describes the mention as being plunged from heaven straight into hell. Despite his growth, Okazuki's immaturity shows in both versions, as he insists most of his time is spent working, so he wants to spend whatever free time he has with Nagisa, not deal with anything unpleasant. In the anime, this ends with Okazuki weakly agreeing to see him someday, but in the VN Nagisa leverages their promise, that the two of them can overcome anything together, to convince him to visit. The VN again highlights Okazuki's conflict by making the final decision the player's choice, but like in Evangelion, Okazuki can't run away from his father figure, and if you choose to give up, you're locked out of the good ending. This leads to Okazuki returning to his childhood home in one of the VN's best cut sequences. It's clear the anime understands how important Okazuki's relationship with his father is for the latter half of AfterStory, given its numerous editions of Nagisa or others referencing it, but that doesn't change the fact he's not on screen for the entire season until the jail visit. Maybe it makes that confrontation more potent in a way, but given how little the two interact throughout the entire series, the loss of this visit makes Naoyuki's character and their relationship markedly less fleshed out compared to the VN. But it's not just Okazuki's relationship with his father that shines in this sequence. We get a phenomenal callback to Nagisa and Okazuki's hand-holding contest from Nagisa Route, as Nagisa promises to hold Okazuki's hand the entire time he's there, to give him the strength to not run away. Okazuki's father is asleep in the living room when they enter, and Nagisa wakes him to introduce herself. He offers to put them up instead if needed, but Nagisa calls back to the pair's promise to create a new life together, without relying on anyone. In another fantastic cut relationship moment, Nagisa is about to offer to visit again, but Okazuki can't stand that, and with a squeeze of the hand communicates as much to Nagisa, leading her to drop the subject. The two really have learned to work together. Nagisa and Naoyuki share an empty conversation while Okazuki listens on, knowing Nagisa has become convinced he's just a kind old man. This contrast is one of the VN's best narrative techniques. We're stuck inside Okazuki's perspective, but even so are able to see his view on his father doesn't quite match up with reality. Nagisa offers to make lunch, resulting in Okazuki convincing her to part hands so she can cook and their hands untwine for the first time since they entered. Big mistake. As Nagisa cooks, Okazuki hears voices and investigates, seeing a man visiting his dad. The VN again uses Okazuki's point of view to communicate two important things at once, both giving more context into his dad's situation and betraying that Okazuki actually does care about his dad. He wonders if this visitor is one of his dad's old work friends or one of his new friends, clarifying that he doesn't trust the latter because his dad can no longer distinguish between good and bad people. The man reveals himself to be in the second category, an antique dealer, and Okazuki explodes, kicking him out, and we get his dad's most heart-wrenching moment, pleading that it's been so long since something good happened to him, but he knows this time things are going his way. It's a moment that both sets up his eventual arrest and provides Naoyuki some much-needed humanizing, instantly communicating the pain he's felt wasting away alone for years and years, something we never get in the anime where we only see him stuck. But despite what he insists, Okazuki does care, yelling at his dad to stop making such big decisions on a hunch, and that he does care about him as family. But it's a point his dad still can't concede, and distracts by identifying Okazuki as already beginning to form his own separate family. Enraged, Okazuki searches for something, anything to hit, and you are again given the choice to follow that instinct or to hold it in. It's a brilliant setup for Okazuki's mental state after his dad's arrest, and to avoid a bad ending you have to hold it in for just a moment, before Nagisa reappears and again takes his hand. They share a quiet meal and the pair walk home, Nagisa insisting Okazuki needs to hold on to his family connection, which to Okazuki's relief she defines as visiting once or twice a year. This sequence does so much to characterize Naoyuki and set up for future events. I do think the anime would be improved if it adapted this instead of spending so much runtime earlier in the season adapting miscellaneous side routes. But in the VN, this visit is even more significant than it initially appears, acting as a catalyst that sends Okazuki's search for purpose spiraling into the abyss. Because VN Okazuki is terrified. Instead of sleeping that night, he lays paralyzed, staring up at the dark ceiling, realizing he's spent his entire life running away from his father, but can't identify anything that differentiates them, no reason he couldn't fall into that same depressive state. In the end, he can only point to Nagisa, and he speaks out loud, leading to one of the most fascinating meta-conversations in the VN. Okazuki wonders aloud what he's living for. Why live? Why work so hard, when he has no friends, no hobbies, no ambitions? And the only answer he can come to is for Nagisa's sake. But they met through happenstance, and not believing in fate, Okazuki can only believe he found a reason to live, by luck. The VN exploring Okazuki's existential dread is interesting enough, but Nagisa's response is downright fascinating. Quietly, she replies that he's wrong, that she's sure he would have met someone else. Okazuki disagrees, that without her he'd have fallen into an abyss, become like his father. It's fantastic foreshadowing for how he follows in his father's footsteps after Nagisa's death, but what makes this conversation insane is it takes place in a dating sim. We had to play through the other routes to get to this point. We unequivocally know that Nagisa is right. Even without her, he would have found someone else. But in another sense, Okazuki is right as well, because in the few routes that continue after graduation, the only thing that ever seems to bring Okazuki purpose is the idea of being a protector, a patriarch. And without someone, anyone, who can act as a subservient party and allow him to fulfill that goal, he has no purpose in life. Notably, Tomoyo Route concludes with the exact situation Okazuki here describes, Okazuki graduating alone into a hopeless existence, only save when Tomoyo returns to be a subservient housewife, and giving his otherwise depressing existence purpose supporting her. And this is why I say there's a void at the heart of the VN, a hopelessness to Okazuki's character, because he never finds meaning in life outside of latching on to someone to protect. His struggle is only in finding someone to fulfill that role. Nagisa can just as easily be swapped out with Tomoyo or Ushio. And to be clear, I'm not saying it's wrong to want to protect those you love or be a provider. What makes it bleak is how Okazuki uses relationships as a means to an end. He doesn't want to protect Nagisa solely because he cares so deeply about her. His ultimate desire is to assuage his fears about living a meaningless existence by telling himself he has meaning so long as he can act as a man, as a provider. His perspective on relationships, his main interest in being with Nagisa, or Tomoyo, or Ushio, is that they allow him to accomplish this distraction. And it's this mindset, left unchallenged by the VN, which comes to poison the work's entire celebration of family and relationships for me. Because what does family really mean to the VN if this is how superficially it positions the core relationship in Okazuki's life? But for now, Okazuki's fear is assuaged, and he rolls over and decides to stop questioning things, deciding he should lead his life singly focused on protecting Nagisa. Time passes, conveyed expertly in the VN which details the changing seasons. Okazuki buys a fan for summer, and we even see it added to the apartment background, before it's replaced by a heater in winter. It's a small change that does a lot to convey that time is continuing to pass by. But Okazuki's routine is broken in both versions by a discussion with Yoshino and his boss, where his boss reveals he's recommended Okazuki for a managerial training program at a friend's company. Okazuki's initially put off, thinking they're trying to get rid of him, but accepts when Yoshino explains it's due to his potential, being a fast learner and good at administrative work. Okazuki may not consider himself smart, but this moment reminds you he did manage to at least graduate from the town's most prestigious high school. It's this moment the anime uses to transition into Yoshino Route, the bulk of which was already covered in the VN, as anime Yoshino explains Okazuki has a lot of life ahead of him, both opportunities and hardship, but it can be overcome so long as you have someone important to you. In the VN, Okazuki instead runs to tell Nagisa the good news as soon as she leaves school, still in his work clothes and ignoring the stares from other students. Nagisa calms him down and the two make a special dinner to celebrate. We also get another great moment of domestic intimacy as you're given a series of choices as Okazuki balances wanting to hug onto Nagisa with not wanting to disrupt her from her homework too much. In the VN, Yoshino Route instead began immediately after the conclusion of Sanae Route, before Okazuki's reunion with his father. It kicks off in a much more awkward fashion, as one of Yoshino's old songs comes on the radio as he and Okazuki return from a job. Yoshino goes back to the VN-only escapades of Okazuki and Tsunahara lying to him they were in a band to get his signature, and you have the choice to fess up or lie. Choosing to tell the truth, VN Okazuki further admits to becoming a legitimate fan, and to continue the route you're required to make the hair-pullingly awkward choice to sing along on the radio unprompted, Okazuki's attempt to prove to his senpai he is a real fan. Regardless of how it was set up, this prompts Yoshino to reveal his backstory, with the pair grabbing a coffee while they talk in the VN. Yoshino's backstory is largely identical in both versions, with him mentioning being a troublemaker throughout school, the VN additionally adding he had no parents. His one interest was music, and he fell in love with the one woman who truly understood his awkward, heartfelt lyrics, Ibuki-sensei. The anime doesn't exactly hide the fact this was a student-teacher relationship, but it is a little vaguer than the VN, with Yoshino simply saying he met someone from school. Upon graduating, Yoshino leaves to go pro, with Ibuki agreeing to marry him if he makes it. And he does, with V and Yoshino admitting it was easy for him, singing about whatever he wanted to crowds of adoring fans. But this all changed when he did a charity event meeting troubled fans who felt supported by his music. Seeing how much his songs meant for them, he was frozen. Everything he'd done so far seemed superficial. No longer was he able to write music solely for himself, he needed to create something that could support so many people. Artistically spiraling, he's eventually broken, seeing one of the fans he met committing an unforgivable crime, the anime revealing it was assault. Feeling he'd failed them, Yoshino turned to drugs, which is depicted pretty explicitly in the anime, surprising given how strict anime frequently is with depictions of drugs. But his habits get discovered by the tabloids and he's ruined. With nowhere else to go, he returns to his hometown, randomly running into Ibuki. He's embarrassed to see her after his failure, but she welcomes him openly, and he realizes he never should have left. He should have sung only for her. It's also interesting that in the VN, he notes he returns to his hometown unchanged, a comfort Okazuki doesn't receive. That's the end of it in the anime, but the VN has an entire follow-up arc where Nagisa and potentially Okazuki visit Ibuki, and decide they need to push Yoshino to pursue music again. They attempt to gather a backup band, resulting in the triumphant return of Mad Nagisa, appearing after Okazuki calls her a dumb girl for suggesting he practice drums to back up Yoshino, insisting he's the boy who married a dumb girl and who isn't able to think up anything better. Okazuki even admits some of his cunning may have rubbed off on her. This leads to an equally great moment where Okazuki realizes the obvious answer, grabbing Akio from the bakery and introducing him to Yoshino, only for Akio to reveal that, of course, he can't play drums. It's a hilarious reversal of expectations, given that up to this point, Akio has been hyper-competent at literally everything he tries. Of course we, and Okazuki, assume he can play the drums at a professional level. This failed attempt gets Nagisa to brand Okazuki a dumb boy as well, but it turns out Yoshino's proficient enough to just do the drum work himself. The two talk at work, with Yoshino ranting about the cost of indie production. Okazuki thinks he might have screwed up, but Yoshino reassures him it's what he loves to do. But this time he's not going to take it too seriously. He's going to sing for himself, for the people he knows, and for the town. It's just a hobby now, something no one besides Akio is apparently allowed to have in the Clannad universe. We then get a back and forth discussion about the title, with Yoshino deciding he wants to dedicate it to Okazuki and his GF, complete with a graphic that changes with each of Okazuki's ridiculous title suggestions. The VN then pivots into Okazuki's visit with his dad, but Yoshino returns to conclude the arc just after Okazuki's job offer, visiting his apartment and presenting the couple with his finished album, as well as giving another one of his love and support each other speeches. But despite its positive tone, it's a monologue that exactly supports my prior thesis. Yoshino doesn't cite any deeper benefit to love or mutual support. He explicitly references how a woman's job is simply to allow a man to have someone to protect, giving their otherwise toilsome life meaning. The focus isn't on who one's partner is, or what mutual benefits a relationship provides. It's about how maintaining traditional gender roles allows men to press forward in otherwise meaningless lives. Not exactly a cheery message. This is where the VN barbecue and dirty mag discussion takes place, while the anime instead adapts a limited celebration of Okazuki's job offer, before both transition into the pair taking a day off. At the park watching Akio in the anime, but in the VN the swimsuit distraction discussion is actually paid off as they visit the pool. Either way, this leads into a fantastic discussion, as Nagisa notes Okazuki was making small talk. He's become kinder than before. Okazuki agrees, laughing that he used to think dealing with people was a hassle. I adore this sequence. Just as Nagisa has picked up some of Okazuki's confidence and wit, he's picked up some of her kindness towards others. It's a great way to show how their relationship has truly affected both of them. However, anime Okazuki's statement is significantly undercut by the fact he did nothing but stick his nose in other people's business in the anime, and QNE knows it, adding Okazuki admitting that despite not enjoying dealing with people, he still meddled in people's affairs a lot. This is textbook lampshading, but it is admirable how the anime absolutely realizes the minor plot holes its timeline shuffling has caused, and makes a point to address them. The phone rings as our anime pair returns to the apartment. Our VN couple is more rudely interrupted, with the pair cooking together, Okazuki leaning in for a kiss when the phone rings. Either way, the call is from one of his dad's old work friends, saying that his father was arrested, implied to be for selling drugs. In an instant, all of Okazuki's hard work is washed away. Rumors spread and his job offer is cancelled, although his boss insists his current job is safe, and none of them view him any differently. And it's here the anime's remixing talents absolutely sing, as we get a fantastic conversation between Okazuki and Nagisa on swings at night. This doesn't occur in the VN, and at first I was going to praise it as an anime original, but it's actually from one of the VN's bad endings, occurring if you choose not to hold it in, and Okazuki punches the wall at his father's house. KyoAni's genius was in going through the source material so thoroughly, and recognizing this content could be pulled into the main storyline here. In either case, Okazuki expresses that he wants to give up, to leave this town. Nagisa makes another Eva reference, insisting they can't run away. Okazuki asks why it has to be this town. Won't she be happy with him regardless of where they are? And the presentation of this line is so fantastically believable in the anime. For the first time there's venom in Okazuki's voice when he speaks to Nagisa. He knew she'd respond that way, but spoke hoping she wouldn't, that she'd tell Okazuki she'd follow him anywhere. But as we've seen before, Nagisa cares more about doing what's best for Okazuki than simply soothing his ego, and in another fantastic line reminds Okazuki that good things have happened in this town as well, the most important being that she met him. From here, the anime transitions to the jail visit from the main route, but in the VN it's a Manchester by the Sea ending. Okazuki truly can't take it and the couple leaves, reaching a bad ending where Okazuki wonders if they can truly avoid painful things by running away. Anime Okazuki of course meets his father with Nagisa by his side, but VN Okazuki expectedly leaves her in the dark and tries to ditch her, another move that drains my credulity that Okazuki genuinely cares and trusts her. But as we've also seen, Nagisa can be surprisingly perceptive, and she intercepts Okazuki in town, insisting to come along and leading to the pair wordlessly taking the train to the next town over, where his father is jailed. In both mediums, Okazuki angrily confronts his father, but his dad doesn't even flinch, silently smiling in response. Seeing his dad not even apologize for ruining his life, Okazuki storms off, Nagisa in pursuit. This sequence is one of my favorite moments in all of animation, but the VN also deserves credit for setting this moment up. During the house visit, we were given the choice to try to hold Okazuki's anger in, but now it's boiled over. There's no stopping him as he slams his fist into the brick wall in an attempt to mask the emotional pain. Nagisa grabs him, stopping him from hurting himself further by hugging him and the two slide to the ground, returning Okazuki to his senses. The VN again leverages its setup, with Okazuki finally snapping out of it when Nagisa calls back to their promise, saying she's the girl who will always love Okazuki and believes Okazuki will always love her, or is she wrong? In both cases, they share some mundane conversation as a pair of randos pass by, before Okazuki asks Nagisa to marry him. One of the smallest, but most impactful improvements, at least to me, is the half-second delay the anime adds before Nagisa says yes. In the VN it's instant, but that tiny delay somehow makes her response more human. Her responding instantly feels like how someone wants their perfect waifu to respond, instant agreement with no thought at all. But the slight pause in the anime makes it a human response. There's no doubt in Nagisa's mind, but it still takes a beat to absorb the question's significance. We then circle back to one of my favorite themes, as Nagisa reassures Okazuki that even if he feels pathetic, she is too, but together they can be strong. We then hear the first occurrence of the arc's most important words, the sequence ending on Nagisa's promise she'll always be with Okazuki. But there's still one baseball-playing obstacle in the way of Okazuki's perfect marriage. This ritual of asking the father for permission is arguably the last remnants of the VN's chauvinist perspective left in the anime, assumedly retained due to its plot significance. In both versions, this begins with Sanae reassuring Okazuki his dad's arrest doesn't change how they see him. Akio appears and begins a Sanae bread gag, but Okazuki stops him from running off. It's important. This begins a baseball duel, Akio requiring Okazuki to hit his pitch before he'll hear his request. Anime Nagisa wants to clear things up, but Sanae stops her. At least she gets to be present. VN Nagisa is entirely absent from the entire affair, as the two men fight over her fate. In either case, Okazuki loses the first bout, his bum shoulder preventing him from hitting any pitches. VN Okazuki intelligently attempts to brush the game aside and ask Akio anyways, but for once Akio's serious. He won't hear a word until Okazuki hits his pitch. Okazuki complains the old man is being silly, but Sanae doesn't interfere. She encourages him to simply hit the ball. Although I love how the VN makes the concept a little more believable by having her add that if it doesn't work out, she'll talk to Akio. Okazuki tries twice more, failing each time, the anime adding a great practice montage of Okazuki repping his swing during his off time and work breaks. But the failures mount and Okazuki falls to his knees in the rain, asking Sanae if this is all the old man's attempt to teach him he's unable to protect anyone. But either way, Akio returns for one final attempt. Okazuki agrees and replicates his home run from the baseball route, which anime Akio does reference at a neat continuity detail, before running up to the old man and falling to his knees, asking him for Nagisa before the ball even hits the ground. The anime at least makes the phrasing slightly less misogynistic by phrasing it instead as Nagisa's hand in marriage, or at least the subs do. I certainly don't know Japanese. Akio acquiesces, with Sanae noting Akio also rushed into adulthood, before we get another heart-wrenching line, as Sanae reminds Okazuki that Nagisa, their child, is their hope, their dream, but from this day forward, he is as well. The sequence ends with the VN clarifying the couple immediately got engaged, and made plans to marry 6 months later, once Nagisa graduates. In the meantime, the couple go on a winter date in both versions, with Nagisa acquiring a second stuffed dango for her birthday. Both versions then have Nagisa, now 20, sharing her first drink with her father. VN Akio clarifies that Sanae can't handle her alcohol, so he has no one to drink with. Nagisa complies, and the VN gives you a choice to cut her off or not. Doing so leads to Nagisa falling asleep, and Okazuki clarifying to her parents that Nagisa is his happiness. Fail to stop her, and Sanae begins drinking in her place, leading to the two drunk Furukawa women harassing Okazuki about if he likes Sanae or not. The anime again remixes like a pro, adapting the drunk Nagisa gag first, then following up with the more heartfelt conversation once Nagisa's drunk energy wanes. As if on schedule, Nagisa next falls sick over the winter. This is barely an event in the anime, but for the VN pair it represents a failure of their vow, as Okazuki fulfills his promise to Akio and calls Sanae to watch Nagisa while he's at work. Even together, they still have to rely on others. As before, Nagisa's pain is heart-wrenchingly conveyed in the VN, not just from sickness, but from the frustration of inconveniencing Okazuki and Sanae. VN Okazuki even relents and asks if she wants to return home to her parents' house, which is where she rides it out in the anime, but the two manage through it in their apartment, Nagisa in both versions having completed enough school to graduate, but having to sit home through her graduation. Especially in the VN, Okazuki's relationship with the Furukawa parents is getting more focused than ever, and I love how we see their relationship grow and evolve as Okazuki does. In this case, we get another conversation between Okazuki and Sanae in the VN, Okazuki expressing that he'd be lost without Nagisa, and Sanae repeating the words she told him when Nagisa first fell sick, saying Nagisa's body is weak, so she hopes Okazuki will stay with her. Okazuki even calls her repetition out. The last time this happened, I praised Sanae's maturity in the face of their new relationship, simply asking Okazuki to stay with Nagisa as long as he could. But she now acknowledges the relationship's permanence, asking Okazuki to continue staying with Nagisa as he always has. But Okazuki can't see Nagisa leave the school she loves in such a dour situation, so hatches a plan when she recovers in the spring. A plan spurred on in the VN by a sadness at seeing her hang up her uniform for good. Okazuki wondering if there's any way to go back and redo what went wrong, which reminds him of the crazy schemes he used to get up with Sunahara. Inspired, Okazuki calls his old friend, but his mom picks up the home phone, changed to a more familiar Mei in the anime. Both reveal Sun as a journeyman staying in a company dorm, the words flashing Okazuki back to his familiar haunt in both versions, before he realizes this is a different dorm, time has moved on. They give him the number and he schemes with Suno, asking him to come visit for Nagisa's sake. In both versions, Okazuki plans to call back once Suno has had time to check his schedule, but the anime loses context on why Suno can't just return the call, with Fia and Okazuki clarifying Suno can't call because Nagisa might pick up and ruin their scheme, a reveal that causes Sunahara to boil over in jealousy. We're not privy to this plan's details in either version, but jump forward to the planned day. The anime skips to the couple on a date, walking up the blossoming hill to school. The VN has more setup, with Okazuki convincing Nagisa to go on a date with him wearing their uniforms, cashing in on Nagisa's promise that for him, she'd even become a weird girl, since she'd already told their neighbors she'd graduated. The VN pair then similarly leaves, heading up that familiar hill when figures suddenly appear at its crest. It's their gathered friends. The exact crowd differs between versions, and can change in the VN depending on your school day choices. Kimura then appears, revealing he got permission to give Nagisa a proper graduation, the anime conveniently having the couple change into their school uniforms now, provided by Ro. In the VN, they first sing the school song, something I'm far too American to understand, before Nagisa is presented with her diploma. The anime adds Ibuki helping Kimura, which is a heartwarming touch, even if much of the context around her supporting Nagisa was cut from the anime. Nagisa then speaks to the gathered crowd in a tear-jerking speech, discussing her accomplishments with the drama club, about discovering she could achieve things with camaraderie and hard work. Despite being lonely her entire last year, she still loves this place, because it was the place she tried her hardest, and Nagisa sheds tears of joy. The speech is similar in both versions, but it's notable in the anime for being one of the few times Nagisa mentions wanting to live with strength despite her weak body, a much more present character trait in the VN. The VN then gives us a much delayed conclusion to Nagisa's route, as the couple leave school hand in hand, finally fulfilling Okazuki's one wish from when he graduated. And with that, Nagisa's long time at school is over. We then cap off the arc with a second visitation with Okazuki's dad, where the pair informs him of their marriage, before they leave to get a ring and submit the marriage paperwork. I also have to again praise the anime's visual design here. Nagisa's anime hairstyle isn't original, it's taken from one of the final visuals at the end of AfterStory, but its inclusion here is genius. I love the look, and it makes her look more formal, more mature, appropriately mirroring them stepping into a more grown-up stage of life, in contrasting the school uniforms of the prior sequence. And beyond that, the second season's updated style, with slightly less exaggerated eye sizes and face shapes, really starts to shine here, making the characters seem just a bit older and more serious than their appearances in the first season, visually communicating the passage of time and their growth as AfterStory's narrative continues on years after graduation. Granted, it's only 2 or 3 years from the start of the VN to AfterStory's time jump, but the VN using the exact same character portrait from Nagisa, from the moment you first met her in high school to when she's an expectant mother, strains credulity. And while I'm not the biggest hater of Clannad's original art style, the more realistic anime look absolutely pays dividends now that years have passed and our characters are facing markedly more mature scenarios. We then get a quick scene in both versions of Okazuki and Akio dueling with psychic damage as they call each other father and son, as well as the couple revealing they're not planning a ceremony until they save up more money, something Sanae reveals her and Akio also did. The pair then returns to their home. We get a second round of quick vows in the VN, but in the anime this is where Nagisa first moves in, and we get the same conversation about not crying for when she moved in the VN. It's a nice moment regardless, but its narrative purpose is diminished here. In the VN we saw Nagisa go through an entire year of struggle living up to this promise, only to pay it off at the prior graduation. Fulfilling her promise she'd only cry in happy situations. With all that already behind us in the anime, this vow isn't particularly relevant. The anime also speedruns Okazuki's nervousness living with Nagisa, as like in the VN we see him hot and bothered as Nagisa bathes. And despite my praise of the VN's depiction of physical intimacy as compared to the anime's odd sexlessness, I think this is where the credulity switches, with the VN confirming that despite getting married, our couple doesn't consummate the marriage until weeks or months afterwards. The VN of course stereotyping Nagisa as just too pure of heart to even think about that sort of thing, and Okazuki not wanting to force her. It's a downside of the VN providing day-by-day details of the plot in Okazuki's perspective. It can't ignore or skip over such a significant relationship milestone without acknowledging it. By its nature, the anime already jumps through perspectives and time much more liberally, meaning it's not a stretch for the viewer to just assume they're doing that sort of thing off screen or whatever. Although the anime does seem to nod at Okazuki not getting any on his wedding night, as his excitement drains when Nagisa mentions he needs to get to bed early since he has work the next day. But either way, Okazuki's lust is interrupted by Nagisa declaring her desire to get a job now that she's graduated. This sequence may be the most misogynistic the VN ever gets, with Okazuki not only requiring her to get his permission, but that of her parents as well. Despite being 20 and having moved out, she's apparently still owned by multiple men. Unsurprisingly, VN Okazuki wants his stay-at-home waifu to stay at home, and leverages Nagisa's sickness to convince her not to get a job. But to his credit, does realize he screwed up. As in both versions, Nagisa reiterates she doesn't want to be held back by her weak body, even if that's a selfish desire. The couple then discusses how Nagisa only has humble desires, and she expresses a slightly different request in each version, asking to hold hands in the anime while in the VN she asks to sleep in the same futon. Which is cute, but as previously mentioned, the VN's detailed perspective means we know it doesn't escalate beyond cuddling. On the other hand, the scene of the pair joining hands in the anime is so sensually animated, I'm tempted to interpret it as a winking innuendo. As they drift off to sleep, the VN couple reflects on the year they spent living together. Both feel stronger but know they still have a ways to go. In the anime, they similarly reflect on the strength they've gained by being together, with Nagisa again promising to stay with Okazuki forever. These are important arc words in the VN as well, but the anime uses them even more masterfully, adding his additional occurrences to set up and remind us of this promise, ending on a great visual of Nagisa's name now next to Okazuki's on the apartment directory plate. In the anime, we briefly return to Okazuki working. Anime Okazuki finally pulling from his VN counterparts more protective tendencies, as he comments that despite financially supporting two people now, it's a joy, not a burden. But showing the difference between our protagonists, we next get an anime original moment of Okazuki bumping into Nagisa shopping as he heads home, and he runs over to help her. My man's just so goddamn excited to see his wife. It's another stark contrast to the VN, where we only saw Okazuki that excited to talk to Nagisa when he got the job offer, only when he had something to brag about. One of the questions I grappled with when compiling this comparison is why only anime Okazuki gives me the impression of being a loving and interested partner, when both versions include plenty of instances of him expressing his love for Nagisa. And while part of it is the removal of V and Okazuki's sexism and more egocentric view of relationships, I think the other half comes down to focus. The anime just spends more time being with Nagisa. Being from Okazuki's point of view, it's easy for the VN, intentionally or not, to convey what he cares about simply by how much focus it's given. And it's surprisingly rare to see VN Okazuki's thoughts turn to Nagisa when there's no ulterior motive. There's no cliché romantic yearning or Okazuki thinking of her in unrelated moments. We do get mentions of the pair hanging out and doing things together, but it's barely afforded any description, maybe a line in passing, swamped by paragraphs of more mechanical plot progression. Just based on the amount of text each topic is given, it gives the impression that Okazuki, despite what he says, isn't super interested in Nagisa or this relationship. By contrast, the anime constantly adds these small domestic scenes, and animates them with such care. Simply their inclusion and quality communicates that both the narrative and Okazuki is deeply invested in Nagisa and their relationship. It's a subtle difference, but an interesting example of how the amount of focus given to something can, intentionally or not, go a long ways to convey how important that thing is to the perspective character, especially in a first-person POV like the VN. Both versions continue sometime later, with Nagisa mentioning she talked to Nishina, who's planning to work part-time at a new family restaurant. VN Okazuki still doesn't want his stay-at-home waifu to leave, but eventually relents and decides to allow it. It's also worth noting that while both Nagisa's promise to continue helping with the housework even if they get a job, anime Nagisa explicitly frames it as because this is her apartment as well, compared to the VN's base assumption that she's inherently required to be the partner that handles housework due to being a woman and all. Just in general, the anime seems to be rubbing its healthier relationship in the VN's face, backing the conversation with a montage of the couple collaborating on household chores, as equals. They seem genuinely happy, uniquely talking that night about the rumored balls of light, and wondering if one is accompanying their happiness right now. But it's a happiness they're alone in. Despite their marriage, VN Okazuki is still afraid, still slipping further into the heart of darkness when he lays alone with his thoughts. And it's here we get one of the anime additions so significant it convinced me my crack theories had to be right. But it won't make sense to discuss until a little later in the VN, so for now, put a pin in it. Time passes as Nagisa begins her new job, the VN providing a cute sequence where the two now wake up and leave the house together, just like back in high school. VN Okazuki discusses visiting Nagisa at work, but Nagisa correctly identifies his desire as indecent. The anime instead skips to what happens next, Akio acting as the devil on Okazuki's shoulder and convincing him to visit. Akio's desire is already a little off-putting in the anime, but it's full-on call the police in the VN, with Akio specifically saying he wants to visit because the waitress outfits are sexy and emphasize the breasts. You do know that is your daughter, sir? Regardless of your choice, VN Okazuki's desires win out, and like in the anime he agrees to go with, following a VN-only escape from Sanae by using one of her unique bread creations as a smoke bomb. But the mood shifts as they arrive at the restaurant, Okazuki for the first time seeing the familiar hillside paved away and replaced with a diner. This is another example where the VN's limited visuals make the moment hit even harder. Like Okazuki, we've seen this background so many times throughout our mini playthroughs that it's a legitimate shock to see it changed. In the anime, Rie and her entirely platonic friend invite Okazuki and Akio in, while their poor VN incarnations still don't get portraits and don't even talk to Okazuki, he just notes they're there. VN Okazuki seems to be more affected by the sudden hillside renovation, but even his anime incarnation is in thought. Anime Akio uniquely providing a different perspective on change, noting the area is more lively now. But in both versions, any contemplation is discarded when maid Nagisa appears. But they're not the only ones who find her cute, and the two rise from their seats when Nagisa begins to get harassed by a group of men. Their threat's much more explicit in the VN, while in the anime they at least try to play it off. Akio ditches Okazuki to deal with the consequences in both versions, with the anime oddly adding an additional scene where Okazuki tells Nagisa he'll lie about being her husband to avoid implicating her. She's sad about the idea, but it doesn't matter. The manager already knows. The VN simply has the manager brush off the incident and tell Okazuki that despite Nagisa's weak body, she's one of his hardest workers. Plus some confusion over Nagisa now also being referred to as Okazuki, a confusion the anime brought up just prior when Yoshino and Okazuki talked. But once again, it's clear the anime cares about Nagisa far more than the VN, expanding on the manager's comments, with him adding that despite her hard work, Nagisa often blames herself and gets depressed when messing up, encouraging Okazuki to support and cheer her up at home. It's another intangible aspect of the anime that greatly improves Nagisa's character for me. It feels like it's actually writing her as a human in a way the VN doesn't. In the VN, Nagisa's always there for Okazuki, and in many ways her insecurities are often framed as positives for Okazuki, forcing her to rely on him. Both versions have her continually criticizing herself, but only the anime, through this minor addition, bothers to address the harm this habit causes her, acknowledging her internal world in a way the VN doesn't. And even if you don't mind the misogyny of the VN writing Nagisa as an idealized fantasy waifu, I think it hurts the VN's believability when she so frequently seems to exist solely for Okazuki and the player's sake, and not as an independent character with her own feelings and worries. We next see the pair at home in both versions, with anime Nagisa mentioning the camaraderie at work reminds her of being in the drama club. VN Okazuki gets a little kiss from Nagisa, but when he lies down he finds all the joy from the day drained. He's still afraid, frozen by the idea that the past isn't coming back. Even his job is changing the town, and while Yoshino characterizes change as a natural part of living, Okazuki wonders back to Nagisa's very first words. Will he still be able to smile in this new changed place? The anime skips a day, but the VN continues to lay it on, with Yoshino mentioning at work part of the town is going to be leveled to add a new highway. Both versions next have Nagisa reveal the old school building, where the drama club room was, is being torn down to build a new one. She's happy for the improvement, but Okazuki explodes, asking how it can be a good thing. Okazuki immediately apologizes for the outburst, but explains he doesn't want to see the old school building, where so much of their relationship was formed, destroyed. It's also a phenomenal mirror to Okazuki and Nagisa's final school date, where they wrote their names on the drama club blackboard as a way to permanently mark their relationship. Only now is it clear how naive that was. The world and the change it brings is so much bigger than them, they simply couldn't see it while still in high school. As anime Okazuki drifts off to sleep, he's worried. The town's changing, he and Nagisa are changing, and as in the VN he thinks back to Nagisa's words. Will he still be able to love this place? But VN Okazuki isn't worried. He's terrified, so scared his chest hurts. Everything is changing, only he's staying the same. And while it is implied in the anime, VN Okazuki explicitly makes the next logical step, realizing this applies to Nagisa as well, that one day they'll be separated. And that's why he hugs Nagisa tightly, kissing her and going further, the VN all but confirming they bang. This continues the troubling VN trend I called out in my last video. Every time the VN gets explicit with sex, every time it's not treated as a joke or gag, Okazuki's focus isn't love or even hedonism, it's as a means to distract him from his own internal conflict. It happens with Ro and her sister's route, it happens with Tomoyo, and more than ever it happens here, as Okazuki attempts to soothe his fear of losing Nagisa with her physical body. But it's no comfort, it's an experience as empty to him as a dream, so sad he could cry. He lays his fear bare, calling back to the VN's very first lines, that in school he hated his stagnant life and wished for everything to change. But now that he's discovered something important to him, he's afraid of losing it. He now wishes for that same stagnancy, for things to never change. Even sex fails to comfort him, and he awakes still troubled. And while my goal is never to psychoanalyze the VN writers or Japanese culture, this trend with sex is one of the elements of the VN that so fascinates me. Like most anime, sex is frequently treated juvenilely, as a gag, but when the moment actually happens there's never any intimacy. As soon as it gets serious it suddenly stops being fun or even titillating. While each encounter is assumedly consensual, Okazuki doesn't seem to care about or even pay attention to his partner. He's not even focused on his own enjoyment. He's using the act, using them, to coldly distract himself from thoughts he'd rather not think. It's not only an odd attitude to take towards sex, it plays into my prior observation of how the VN treats relationships as superficially transactional. Sex, even for a married couple, can't facilitate emotional connection or intimacy. It's unquestionably assumed to be a transactional affair neither partner really enjoys. It's elucidating how both characters are written to have basically zero interest in sex even as their relationship progresses. Nagisa written as comically naive, with legitimately no interest or even knowledge of sex, and Okazuki feeling he needs to hold himself back out of some concern for her innocence or whatever. Even for a married couple, sex is implied to be bad or dirty somehow, and it's notable that what causes Okazuki to fail to hold himself back isn't desire or even lust. It's only when he can no longer soothe his fears on his own that he ignores these concerns and pushes himself on Nagisa, overriding any concern or care for how she might feel about it. It's a revealing mindset into the writer's worldview, where Nagisa, the woman, is frequently the one initiating physical intimacy but never sex, and when Okazuki, as a man, performs his duty and pushes himself on her, it's totally without intimacy. To be clear, I attribute this to the work's view as a whole and not the characters, because this mindset is never challenged or even acknowledged. It's a default assumption about relationships baked into the work. But what makes this insane is the fact that the next scene is the reveal of Nagisa's pregnancy, creating a thematic, if not causal, link between Okazuki selfishly forcing himself on Nagisa and Ushio's conception. This colors everything that follows, notably meaning Okazuki's vain attempt to ignore change inadvertently caused it, directly led to Nagisa being taken away from him. But more than that, it makes everything that follows, the pregnancy, Nagisa's death, Ushio's abandonment, kind of icky. It means Nagisa had no agency, at least initially, in what caused her eventual suffering and death. And while in the real world, no one deserves to be judged for the circumstances of their birth, it's a little weird seeing all the cute Ushio moments and remembering she's a product not of mutual love, but of Okazuki's fear and jealousy. And on its own, this subtext could add depth and complexity to the VN, but what makes it wasted and discomforting is the fact it's never acknowledged. Neither the VN or Okazuki himself reflects on these implications, and Okazuki's jealous actions are never judged or commented on after the fact. It conveys how these are relationship dynamics the VN is so comfortable with, it can't imagine anything different, much less recognizing how troubling many of the implications are, and leaves this aspect of Okazuki's character arc unresolved and the reader feeling a little gross. And while most players won't pick up on the subtextual content on their first playthrough, KyoAni did. Because that small added scene I told you to put a pin in, it shows that KyoAni didn't just ignore this content. It didn't take the implications for granted like the VN did. It rebukes it. In a quiet anime original moment, Okazuki and Nagisa sit by their beds, discussing the happiness they found together in the rumored wish-granting balls of light. Okazuki asks Nagisa what she'd wish for, joking about her only having humble desires, before Nagisa bashfully admits there is one thing she wants: a baby. And it's this scene that convinces me that anime's removal of all the aforementioned VN subtext isn't entirely because it didn't have time or because it didn't want to include taboo topics. Because a small line intentionally contradicts the VN, conveying in no uncertain terms that both anime parties were interested in hooking up, and that Ushio was the product of their love, and not of Okazuki's fear and selfishness. Sure, maybe it's a little irresponsible for such a young couple to intentionally try to conceive, but with this one scene it wipes away so much of the VN's unacknowledged gross subtext. It means Nagisa's struggle and eventual sacrifice was for something she also chose, not something Okazuki inflicted on her. It means Ushio was born out of a desire to form a family, instead of being linked to Okazuki's darkest moment. Despite being such a small scene, it shows KyoAni isn't interested in mindless adaptation, it's conversing with the VN's original themes, acknowledging and refuting the troubling view on relationships so baked into the VN, it didn't seem to even notice itself. So in the end, the anime does lack the depth and nuance of the VN. Okazuki's fear is a fascinating arc, and an essential element to the VN's narrative. But without it, and with KyoAni's other changes, the anime is able to present a more cohesive and thematically intentional narrative about a couple growing closer together, having a kid, and facing tragedy. The themes and characterization may not be as complex, but the pair's more human and more wholesome characterization allows the emotional moments, the tragedy and tearful reunions, to connect more and hit harder than in the VN, where we're burdened by a backdrop of selfish motivations and unsettling implications. But for now, let's return to the plot, with Okazuki and Nagisa stopping by her parents' house in both versions. To convey time has passed, Akio reveals a massive collection of Nagisa photos he's taken on repeat visits to her work. And speaking of gross behavior the VN never challenges or takes issue with, Akio's stalking is again way creepier in the VN, including him taking downshirt photos of his own daughter. FBI, open up! Anime Okazuki is expectedly put off, while the VN returns to sex being a gag again as Okazuki begs for the pervy shots. This does ironically set up for the upcoming pregnancy reveal, as Akio gives him the shots out of pity, saying he'll need them since he's too meek to do anything to Nagisa. In both versions, Okazuki mentions Nagisa wanted to talk to Sanae about something, before she stumbles and they both run over. She's sick, and pregnant! Despite perving on his daughter mere seconds ago, Akio is unable to comprehend Nagisa as sexually active, resulting in Nagisa declaring to her parents that the two of them are indeed banging. Sanae is expectedly nonplussed, Akio upset before giving begrudging congratulations, as Okazuki considers how rare a creature Nagisa must be to declare such a thing to her parents, his VN incarnation making the less than flattering comparison to one of those rare deep-sea creatures that get their own nature special. And with that, the VN's cohabitation arc is over. Our two leads have learned to live as a couple, and now it's time to figure out how to welcome a third member into the family. Both begin with the couple talking with Nagisa's parents, confirming they are planning to keep the child, which is mentioned as a more significant call in the VN. The anime smartly continues to reinforce Okazuki's paternal connection, adding him wondering if his dad was having the same sorts of worries before he was born. Yoshino congratulates Okazuki on his return to work, assumedly through the neighborhood grapevine in the VN, but the anime oddly takes the time to specify he heard it from Ibuki, who heard it from Sanae. And while I promise not to psychoanalyze the VN writers, I am absolutely convinced someone on staff recently had a child of their own, because the VN goes into exhaustive detail on Nagisa's prenatal visits and gynecological care. It echoes the exhaustive detail the VN provided about Okazuki's work, and honestly, I like it. It helps ground the events in their new adult responsibilities, contrasting the carefree lives they lived in high school. We also get an absurd VN sequence where Nagisa admits the gynecologist opened her up more than Okazuki did, leading to a penis envy dream that night where he's mocked for being half the man Akio is, a comparison side stories tragically confirms. Nagisa next brings up wanting a home birth, eventually convincing Okazuki and Akio, although we again see the anime's added care for Nagisa, as it adds her parents clarifying that her health is the most important factor. Yagi is then introduced as their midwife, the VN clarifying she's Sanae's old classmate and specifying she's no doctor, just available to help with the delivery. The anime also begins to set up Nagisa's health concerns earlier, with an added sequence where Sanae whispers to Okazuki that Yagi is aware of Nagisa's poor health as she leaves, which Nagisa of course catches, asserting she wants to give birth to the child no matter what, a sentiment that gives Okazuki pause. The VN continues to heap on more details of Ushio slowly starting to develop, but it's here the anime starts remixing events. Because as I've praised with other routes, the VN has a great sense of pacing, giving the couple one last happy moment where they name Ushio before everything begins to spiral downhill. The anime doesn't present as clear an arc, with more minor ups and downs, so holds off on the naming until after Nagisa's sickness. It's after this naming in the VN that Nagisa falls sick. As we've come to expect, her sickness is significantly more serious in the VN. Anime Okazuki simply comes home to see Sanae visiting and Nagisa in bed, while in the VN he returns home to find Nagisa literally collapsed on the floor, freaking out before remembering to call Sanae. The baby's not currently at risk, but the delivery could be in jeopardy if she doesn't recover. And as with VN Okazuki's earlier dread, his perspective is markedly different from his anime counterpart, because while Anime Okazuki is worried, VN Okazuki knows Nagisa is going to die. Even with the delivery months out, he's convinced of the conclusion, and knows there's nothing he can do to change it. It's an interesting change of pacing. In the anime, Nagisa's death comes somewhat as a shock, while the VN instead conveys a creeping dread, with Okazuki getting worn down day after day leading up to the delivery, where the inevitable occurs. As before, the VN rubs in just how frustrated Nagisa is being a burden, and how persistent her fever is. But while she's bedridden, we get an excursion with each of her parents, the order of which the anime switches. The anime adapts Sanae's excursion first, which occurs after Akio's visit in the VN, and begins with her and Okazuki leaving to grab lunch and restock groceries, Nagisa encouraging them to take some time away. The anime skips this prelude and has Sanae ambush Okazuki on his way home, and they go to lunch. Okazuki's suspicious of her motives, but we get a safe level of flirtiness between the two I adore, before Sanae drops the bomb, revealing she just heard from the doctor that the birth will be dangerous. Even Nagisa hasn't been told, and unlike the anime, V and Sanae doesn't dance around the point, explicitly stating that the doctor recommends an abortion. I've seen people criticize the VN for this moment, but I again love the bluntness. It doesn't sugarcoat the issue, and conveys they're now having to deal with serious adult issues. Yes, it contrasts against the base game's sillier tone, but that contrast highlights that our older characters now need to grow and mature to face the real world. In both versions, Sanae clarifies the baby is okay, but Nagisa is at risk if her sickness doesn't lift by the delivery. She encourages Okazuki to talk to Nagisa. The sooner she decides, the better. Nagisa is of course against this in both versions, expressing she wants to try her best and can't deal with letting her physical weakness fail her unborn child. Both versions have set this desire up, but the VN's added setup pays off here. We've seen Nagisa frustrated since the start at her physical weakness, wanting it to not hold her back, to live with strength despite her condition. It's instantly clear to us just how big a failure giving up due to it would be for her. In the anime, this conflict somewhat falls flat, since it's immediately resolved by patching up one of the VN's more notable plot holes, with Nagisa compromising and giving up on the home delivery. But this is a massive conflict in the VN. Okazuki tries desperately to convince Nagisa to give up on the child, hating himself for trying to crush her dream, but knowing she'll die if she goes through with it. Nagisa equally desperate to not give up after trying so hard. It's harsh, but the conflict feels genuine, and I appreciate the reality of our couple not always being perfectly on the same page. Sanae suggests they need time apart, and Okazuki stays over at the bakery with Akio while Sanae watches over Nagisa. I adore how this highlights how much Okazuki's relationship with Nagisa's parents has evolved. No longer a kid they talk down to, Okazuki gets drunk with Akio and asks him what he'd do. But this is an issue where even an experienced adult can't give a perfect answer. But his words do get Okazuki to realize that just like how Nagisa is his dream, Nagisa's reason for living is now her child. He can't deny it to her. Okazuki's still worried about change, about Nagisa dying, but has fresh resolve, asking Nagisa what living with strength means to her when he returns. Okazuki explicitly tells her his dream is her, and she confirms her dream is the child. Okazuki makes her promise to fulfill both dreams, and Nagisa agrees, with conviction. On one hand, this is a fantastically crunchy sequence. I love how themes and conflicts that bubbled away previously are raised to the forefront to create believable conflict between our main couple. On the other hand, the characters referencing the story's themes so directly is a little unbelievable. People's lives don't have themes and payoffs in real life, and most of us will never dramatically hash out our specific reasons for living. It's a perfect example of the trade-offs I mentioned at the start of the video. The anime absolutely loses out on great content by not adapting this, but at the same time its more subdued treatment of these ideas keeps its characters and narrative far more believable and relatable. We'll discuss how exactly it accomplishes this later, but the result is a subtle but fantastically emotive rendition of this conflict, even if it lacks the explicit thematic connection of the VN. But a great example of the anime's nuance is immediately shown as it starts down Akio's side quest, with an added scene of Okazuki mentioning to Akio that despite Nagisa's resolve, he consents she's scared too. It's another tiny moment the anime adds highlighting Nagisa's humanity. Unlike what the VN depicts, most people are conflicted, and don't unyieldingly live for one single purpose, especially when facing something as serious as their own possible death. In the anime, Okazuki's just hanging around the store when Akio decides to take him on a trip. But this is a significantly tenser encounter in the VN, occurring before the Sanae visit and kicked off by an uncharacteristically terse phone call from Akio, telling Okazuki to take the next day off work. It's a surprisingly serious tone for the old man, and despite obviously not being able to take the next day off, Okazuki is able to take PTO soon and leaves Nagisa and Sanae's care to meet up with the old man. In both versions, Akio takes Okazuki to his secret place, explaining he's going to finish the story he told Okazuki before, about the time Nagisa nearly died. For some reason, the anime nearly completed this story the first time they talked, but in the VN Akio was vague then, only now explaining the details, describing Nagisa waiting for them outside in the snow when she was young and falling sick. It's a presentation I prefer in the VN. It reflects Akio's changing relationship with Okazuki that he only now reveals such private details, compared to back when Okazuki was some high schooler his daughter was dating. Either way, we get new information, as Akio explains that when all hope seemed lost, he ran from the house with Nagisa in his arms, eventually coming to this clearing, and in that moment, his prayers were answered. The sun rose, Nagisa seemed embraced by the forest, and her eyes opened. But now this verdant spot is being developed, the VN again using its static backgrounds to great effect by crossfading from Akio's flashback to the site, now under construction. Akio comments in both versions that sad things may be ahead, but they're there to rely on each other as family. It's a moment the VN has built towards in many ways. As Akio no longer looks down on Okazuki as a kid, he's an equal, facing the same tribulations Akio once did, as in both versions he corrects himself and stops referring to Okazuki as kid, from now on calling him Tomoya. Anime Okazuki seems to understand Akio's words, and gains some resolve, but VN Okazuki admits the old man's story didn't make a lick of sense to him, wondering if Akio meant the forest literally saved Nagisa, or if he is presenting it to Okazuki as a symbol of how things change, telling him like this place, Nagisa will one day vanish. Despite being such a goober, it's funny that here, like Akio's pre-marriage baseball challenge, Okazuki takes Akio's words a little too seriously, now gripped more than ever by a dread that an unstoppable force is coming to take Nagisa away. But next up is the crown jewel of the anime's naturalistic storytelling, Nagisa and Okazuki deciding on Ushio's name. As mentioned, this occurred before Nagisa fell sick in the VN, and the anime provides its finest setting glow-up by moving the discussion from their apartment to the shore at sunset, the waning sun foreshadowing the limited time the two have together. In both versions, Okazuki feels the baby move in Nagisa's belly, and they decide it's time to give it a name. In both versions, they decide on Ushio, complete with an incredibly moving description of the name's meaning. Nagisa is the shore, but Ushio is the ocean, larger and more grand, but always returning back home to the shore. The anime's choice of setting further uplifting the impact of this comparison. And here's where the anime strikes with its version of the VN's conflict, in an added moment where they discuss that they again failed to go to the beach this year. Okazuki makes a comment, simple on its face, that they should make sure to all visit next year with Ushio, but the look on his face betrays the statement's true meaning, as does Nagisa's troubled delay before she agrees. Compared to the VN's drag-out arguments, it's a minuscule conversation, but conveys exactly the same conflict. Instead of having the characters explicitly talk about grand ideas like purpose and what living means to them, it's all communicated in these few lines. We can plainly see the same pleading in anime Okazuki's words. He's also terrified of losing Nagisa, desperate for her to assuage his fears she won't be here in a year's time, but too scared to speak it directly. And Nagisa knows this, which makes her faltering reply so hard to hear. She's promised to stay by Okazuki's side forever so many times before, but now she doesn't know if she can honestly make that promise. It's notable because it also betrays an uncertainty in her, in contrast to her fearless attitude in the VN. She's not embodying a single-minded purpose, she's not exclusively acting as a thematic foil for Okazuki. Anime Nagisa's also going ahead with the pregnancy, but that doesn't mean she's not aware and afraid of the possible outcomes. As this occurs, we continue to cut away to the illusionary world in the anime. It's a smart change, with the coming winter in the illusionary world ramping up tension in parallel with the increasing real-world tension. The VN shows the couple starting to stockpile baby goods, as well as a meeting with their doctor, who reiterates the risk and that they're passing the last chance for a safe abortion. I praised the VN's frankness before, but this time I think the pendulum swings too far. It's one of a couple moments in the VN that presents the pregnancy not as risky, but as suicidal, making Nagisa's conviction less admirable and more nakedly irresponsible. The anime instead catches back up as Okazuki sees Sanae out, where he wonders if she hates him for doing this to her daughter. Interestingly, the conversation progresses differently between versions. In the VN, Okazuki comments that Nagisa became strong because of him. Without him, none of this could have happened. It's a pretty conceited comment. Like, come on, you're basically telling Sanae no one else would have ever wanted to knock up her daughter. And to its credit, the anime realizes this, with anime Okazuki admitting it's a conceited thought, but wondering if Nagisa wouldn't have been equally happy without him, living in the bakery with her parents. Another added example of anime Okazuki uniquely acknowledging and prioritizing Nagisa's emotions. Sanae reassures him regardless, with the VN additionally dropping an extremely rare reference to Okazuki's mom, as he admits he doesn't remember anything about her, so thinks of Sanae as a maternal figure, internally admitting he loves her. Just like before, the parental meetings come in pairs, and just like before the anime moves them, in this case moving Akio's meeting to after Christmas. In both versions, Okazuki returns to Akio's secret spot and is surprised to see how much has already changed. Akio's there as well, with Okazuki asking in both versions if stopping the hospital's construction would cause Nagisa to get better. Akio rightly criticizing the construction's too big for one person to stop, and regardless, the hospital's going to help people. I also have to reference one of the VN's craziest cross-route connections. As well, Okazuki here curses the hospital's construction. Fuko Route has him complaining about how horrible their town is for not having a hospital, for forcing Ibuki to travel the next town over to visit Fuko. It's a genius connection reinforcing how Okazuki's perspective on change is entirely tied to his current life circumstances. In either case, Okazuki mentions he might start to hate this town, with V and Akio stepping up and telling Okazuki to inform him if he's about to do anything illegal. Akio's not going to stop him, but do it for him. As they part, Okazuki internally admits he loves the old man too. These two pairs of meetings are such fantastic sequences, highlighting such amazing character development, especially in the VN. They're so heartfelt, and the development is breathtaking when you think back to Okazuki's first interaction with these apparently kooky parents. I've said as much before, but part of what makes this special isn't just how great the writing is, but how infrequently we see this type of relationship depicted in anime and similar media. In the anime, Akio instead references convincing the authorities to save some of the old-growth trees, a fact that VN mentions in a later unadapted conversation, before anime Akio highlights the anime's continuity by comparing it to Tomoyo's similar actions. In the anime, snow then begins to fall, and Nagisa's contractions begin, but in the VN we still have Nagisa's birthday left, which the anime adapted just prior to this meeting. The anime begins this sequence with another illusionary world cutaway, further putting the audience on edge. Previously, we only got these cutaways at the start of the episode or after breaks, but now it's cutting in more and more frequently, and in the middle of the episode. Okazuki gives Nagisa the third stuffed dango in both versions before friends arrive. In the anime, this is a classic get-together, starring Sunahara, Kyo, Ro, and Katomi back from America, while in the VN, Sunahara and the choir couple drop by, a surprise visit secretly orchestrated by Sunahara and the Furukawas. The anime does call out that they got a card from Tomoya and the choir girls, but it is notable that the anime's wider cast means our not lesbian couple aren't Nagisa's close friends like in the VN. Actually, now that I think of it, they met back up as coworkers, so you think she would have invited them anyways, but I guess that was all off screen so it doesn't count. It's also worth noting Sunahara's fit is even more egregiously awful in the VN. The VN choir girls uniquely flatter Nagisa's parents, while the anime provides a quick reference to Yoshino Route's VN conclusion as Okazuki presents his new album as a gift to Sunahara, a thoughtful connection. In both versions, Sunahara asks Okazuki what it feels like to be an expectant father. Okazuki's still unsure, which convinces Sunahara he's still the same person as before, though it is a little sad that Suna mentions in both versions still wanting to be friends and hang out, given this is the pair's last meeting. This leads into some anime original exposition, as Kotomi explains more about the parallel world her parents were researching, not so subtly mentioning that recent research has revealed the two worlds can interact with each other. Okazuki flashes back to his memories of Nagisa's play, seeing the connection, and the anime again shows off its great character writing, as the group further connects us to Ro's fortune-telling ideals. That fortunes failing to come true means we have multiple possible paths in life ahead of us. Okazuki's second meeting with Akio and Nagisa's delivery come directly after this in the anime, but as normal the VN drags painfully on. More than ever, VN Okazuki is convinced Nagisa is going to die, her fever worsening until she's again bedridden. In a great bit of writing, he notes that she moves less as the baby moves more, as if she's passing her own life over to their child. In many ways, the VN lays the tragedy of the situation out more effectively than in the anime, with VN Okazuki wondering why Nagisa can't have her one simple goal of being a mother. Why does she have to suffer so much for such a simple desire? During this VN-only sequence, Sanae calls, concerned Akio's gone missing. Okazuki leaves to investigate and finds Akio sneaking away from the worksite, having vandalized it to stop them from tearing up a grove of trees they promised to save, which the anime previously referenced. Okazuki socks the old man, yelling at him for making Sanae worry and leaving before he can respond, maybe the only time he has the last word over the old man. This makes it an interesting confrontation, but it also goes nowhere, outside of relating to the odd Akio route ending. But after this excruciating buildup, Nagisa's labor finally begins. In one of its more technically masterful subtle changes, the anime alters when this occurs, bumping it from spring to early winter, which I guess is technically justified by anime Nagisa asking for a kid before the VN couple had any sort of contact. This ingeniously fixes one of the VN's most notable plot holes, since the anime's snowfall brings the town to a standstill, forcing the couple to fall back on a home birth. No such barrier presents itself in the VN, making Nagisa and Okazuki's unquestioned decision to continue with the home birth, despite Nagisa's worsening health since that original discussion, so irresponsible it verges on unbelievable. And more than plot convenience, the anime's snowfall creates an appropriately trapped and helpless tone for the upcoming events, as well as setting up a connection to Ushio's fate that pays off later. But regardless of the reason, Nagisa begins a painful home labor, Yagi and her parents arriving to help. Nagisa's suffering is palpable in both versions, with Okazuki describing how she'd repeatedly faint, only to be awakened by the pain, the VN characterizing it as being tortured to death. Okazuki retreats inward in both versions, unable to help outside of holding tightly to Nagisa's hand. Color on Okazuki's surroundings fade away, until the anime ingeniously has a child's cry break through his daze. This same sequence occurs in the VN, but a lack of an actual crying sound effect means it doesn't have the same impact. Okazuki holds his healthy child and is surprised to see Nagisa alive, and begins to ramble to her, initially out of relief before it turns into a desperate attempt to stop her from slipping away. A moment the anime again elevates by showing us Nagisa's POV as her eyes flutter closed, and, if you listen carefully, her last breaths growing fainter before they stop, and her hand goes limp. The anime flashes back through the couple's domestic life together, moments we largely only got in the VN, including a pretty direct reference to the VN moment where they're about to kiss after cooking together, and an anime original shot of Nagisa hanging up laundry, which appears to be the inspiration for the Blu-ray's fantastic cover art. Actually, and I apologize for the tangent at this dramatic moment, the anime created so much fantastic bespoke art for its various DVD and Blu-ray releases. I'm showing some of it here, but it's an absolute shame how little of it is available in high resolution, even after some lengthy Googling on my part. After this, both versions slip into the surreal, with Okazuki finding himself at the foot of the hill on the day he met Nagisa, wondering if he was wrong then, if it wouldn't have been better if they'd never met. Nagisa passes by, and in the anime Okazuki makes his decision, fantastically referencing the first episode by having the world return to the desaturated state from before he met Nagisa. This decision of course sets up his eventual reversal at the end of AfterStory. But oddly in the VN, both times it's your choice to call out to Nagisa or not, the only difference being if she survives. It's an option that undercuts Okazuki's upcoming arc, as if you do choose to call out to her, Nagisa admits she's glad Okazuki doesn't regret meeting her, before she disappears into a white void. But for all its fantastic additions, this is also where one of the anime's most widespread criticisms rears its head, with the peppy ending song cutting in just a few moments after the episode's tragic conclusion, although it does wait a few seconds longer than normal to start. On the flip side, I do have to compliment the anime's incredible episode names, this one being White Darkness. It's so evocative. A Room Without Anyone and Two Shadows from the first season are also standout names, as are With the Same Smile as That Day from May Route and The Season You Were In from Misai's Misadventures. Ushio's upcoming episodes also get banger titles. The Ends of the Earth, The Tidal Breeze's Mischief, and of course, Small Palms all go so hard. And with that, we move into Clannad's final arc, accompanied by a 5-year time skip. So far, I've spent a lot of time describing content the anime cut, but to KyoAni's credit, they knew it was most important. From here on out, the content is adapted almost one-to-one. In both versions, Okazuki describes spending the intervening 5 years drowning his pain with physical labor, working long overtime without breaks, and spending his little time off gambling. More than anything, he wants to leave town, but in the anime claims he has nowhere else to go. But his reasoning in the VN hits even harder. He would leave, but despite all his suffering, he can't find it in him to betray Akio and Sanae. We also get some great visual details in the anime, with a quick added scene of Okazuki working overtime with his boss, showing instead of telling about his new work-life balance, as well as giving us a glance at his apartment, now trashed and Nagisa's name torn from the nameplate. Both versions also handle Ushio's introduction differently. The VN holds off on showing her portrait until the big reveal, but has a quick scene of Sanae visiting with her. It mechanically highlights how Okazuki can't even bring himself to look at Ushio, although Okazuki notes her growth is the one thing that forces him to confront how much time has passed since Nagisa's death, the only reminder of how many long years have passed without her. At the same time, I respect the anime's approach to totally scrub any appearance of Ushio until her reveal, although in a blink and you miss it moment, we do see Okazuki looking for her when Sanae arrives, showing that these visits with Ushio have been occurring in the anime as well, which it does confirm later. Speaking of, Okazuki's finally broken out of his routine by Sanae visiting to invite him out on a date. Despite Okazuki being so clearly burnt out, we get some more great flirty banter between the pair, especially in the VN, including spending some time out on the town, Okazuki noting how much it's changed and how for the first time in a long time he's enjoying himself. Regardless, both pairs end up at the same family restaurant Nagisa worked at, where years prior Sanae warned Okazuki of the pregnancy's risk. The service there must also be horrible, because at least in the VN, the same background characters are still waiting to be served a whole 5 years later. But as Okazuki suspects, Sanae is plotting something, as she invites Okazuki to go on a vacation with the whole family, including Ushio. In one of its few regretful cuts to this arc, the anime removes some fantastically revealing follow-up dialogue, where Okazuki frames it as him no longer deserving to be with Ushio, but Sanae responding that it's not about what he deserves. Raising Ushio is his responsibility. It's a great dichotomy, and highlights how Okazuki is doing the exact thing he hated his father for, refusing to acknowledge his child as family. Okazuki doesn't agree outright, but Sanae's relentless pestering, split over multiple days in the VN, eventually wears him down, via Okazuki rationalizing that Ushio will want to spend all her time with the Furukawas anyway. But when Okazuki arrives at the bakery the morning of the trip, no one's there. In the anime he enters through a back entrance, but in the VN he steps through the main door, setting up for the reoccurring gag of being mistaken as a customer, but no one answers. In both versions Okazuki finds a note from Sanae, saying something came up, but encouraging Okazuki to go on the trip with Ushio anyways. The VN additionally noting the note's back contains day-by-day plans and train tickets. It's here Ushio appears in the VN, but in the anime she's oddly treated as a horror movie monster, as Okazuki catches glimpses of her running through the house. Either way, Okazuki is forced to finally acknowledge her, calling out to Ushio and she appears, our first view of her in both versions. Their conversation is similar in each version, with Ushio wanting to go on the trip, but not knowing what happened to Sanae and Aki. As we'd expect, V and Okazuki's language is harsher, but despite being nicer, his anime counterpart acts equally distant towards Ushio. V and Okazuki searches through the house to see if the Furukawas are still hanging around, and comes face to face with the door to Nagisa's room. It's a moment the anime also adapted during Okazuki's earlier Ushio hunt, but the VN's prior repetition of this background makes it hit harder. For us, like Okazuki, this is a nostalgic sight. But the Furukawas fail to arrive, forcing Okazuki to go out and shop for lunch. In both versions, he runs into a housewife, changed to a Sogai, the Furukawa's neighbor, in the anime. Their conversation is also changed. In the VN, it mainly serves to show Okazuki that Ushio has been stealthily following him. The heat's taken a toll on her, and Okazuki's forced to retreat back home empty-handed. Anime Sogai instead drives the conflict home, explaining she heard about his circumstances but doesn't blame him for being unable to raise a child on his own, but hopes they're still meeting regularly, because they're family. Okazuki cooks up fried rice on their return, ingredients assumedly purchased prior in the anime, while in the VN, this is Okazuki's fallback dish since they never made it to the store. Their conversation while eating is the same in both versions, with Ushio complaining about the dish being too bitter due to the pepper, but as mentioned, this is something the VN set up, with Akio much earlier criticizing Okazuki's fried rice as not being grown up enough, not having enough bitter pepper. But for now, it's a flavor Ushio isn't ready to deal with. The VN clarifies they got ready-to-go meals from the supermarket for dinner before going to bed, still waiting for the Furukawas to return. Like with his father, we can see in both versions that Okazuki's outward disinterest isn't entirely true, as he drapes a blanket over Ushio as she sleeps. He can't help but care. The next morning, Sanae and Akio still haven't returned, and father and daughter wait as other families pass, Okazuki unimpressed by Ushio going to the bathroom on her own as they wait. Finally, Okazuki asks Ushio if she's okay going on a trip with just the two of them, and she agrees. The two leave, accompanied by an energetic new track, and in penance for the last episode's ending transition, the anime displays its best cut to end credits, with Ushio skipping perfectly lined up with the transition. As is expected, the VN includes more details on the logistics of their travel, Okazuki explaining the express tickets Sanae provided were only valid the prior day, so he purchases standard rail tickets. The anime is also continuing its illusionary world sequences here, with the girl and the robot leaving in search of a warm place despite snow beginning to fall. Okazuki and Ushio's conversation on the train is similar, with Ushio escaping to the bathroom to cry when Okazuki snaps and yells at a nearby kid for being noisy. We get some more great visual setup in the anime, as Ushio pauses before telling Okazuki Sanae told her the bathroom was the one place she was allowed to cry. She's thinking about the other options Sanae provided, but doesn't trust her father enough yet to speak it. In both cases, Okazuki gets a toy robot to entertain Ushio, the VN specifying they made an additional stop just to pick it up. We get a great continuation of Okazuki's warped perspective, as he assumes Ushio isn't having any fun being with him, again framing it as him not being worthy instead of it being his responsibility. They stop for the night, the VN presenting a relatively hectic situation, as their delay means they have to skip a scheduled zoo trip, Ushio choosing to visit the flower field instead when Okazuki tells her they can only make one stop now, before the two have to walk around town searching for a vacant hotel, the reservation Sanae got, of course, being for the prior day. In the VN, Okazuki watches Ushio drift off to sleep watching TV, while the anime adapts a conversation from the following day, where Okazuki catches Ushio sneaking glances at him. He tries to be nicer in both versions, but clams up when she asks about her mother. The next day they reach their destination, the entire train now emptied out. Clearly Instagram hadn't been invented yet. Okazuki immediately recognizes the familiar smell of the flowers in the VN, and Ushio plays in the field as Okazuki watches, legitimately happy that some good came out of this trip. But Ushio returns teary-eyed, explaining she lost her toy robot. Okazuki blows this off, although hilariously only anime Okazuki offers to buy a replacement. His stingier VN counterpart says Akio or Sanae can buy her a new one. But she continues to search regardless, as VN Okazuki wonders what the point of all of this was. In a day or two they'll go their separate ways, and he'll return to his banal life, apart from Ushio. But as he waits, anime Okazuki gets flashbacks, presented using the same flashes of the past used in Tomoyo Route, and heads further along to the Cape to investigate, an action he similarly takes in the VN when he smells the familiar ocean air. He leaves Ushio behind to search for her toy, which is honestly a little irresponsible. In both versions, Okazuki finds an old woman by the water's edge waiting for him. It's his grandmother, who reveals Sanae told her Okazuki was coming. The following conversation is identical between versions, with his grandmother explaining how hard his father worked to raise him, how much he sacrificed. The words are the same, but the anime draws more emotion out of it, since it's able to also show Okazuki's reaction to these words. Okazuki realizes his father was in the exact same situation he's in now, but unlike Okazuki, he didn't let go. He gave up everything he had to raise his kid, and Okazuki finally admits he had a good father. I'm not entirely sure why, but this change of heart only worked for me in the VN. Maybe because it had done more to characterize his father in a sympathetic manner, or maybe just because I had already watched the anime. But his dad shows up so little in the anime, the only thing that really stuck with me was that he'd beaten Okazuki so bad it permanently messed up his shoulder, which made this sympathetic retelling somewhat unconvincing on my first watch. Either way, the woman asks Okazuki to tell his dad to return back to his hometown, back to his mother. Okazuki returns to Ushio, still searching in the flowers, and it's here he has a revelation. Seeing Ushio's attachment to the first gift from her papa, Okazuki realizes she doesn't hate him, that despite what he's been telling himself, she really does want to be with him. However, there's a cynical angle to this revelation as well, as Okazuki notes she's someone only he can protect. It ties into the series' earlier exploration about his reason for living, and causes me to also interpret this moment in the VN as Okazuki finding a way out of the meaningless existence he's lived for the last 4 years. By readopting Ushio, he can regain his sense of purpose by again acting as a protector and a provider. It's a more self-centered motivation for this ostensibly wholesome reunion, and I find it disappointing the VN didn't instead return to the theme of deserves versus responsibility, which it had already set up. The anime instead ingeniously ties this moment of relationship development to Okazuki's freshly changed relationship with his father, as thinking back to how his dad talked with him, Okazuki, for the first time, kneels down to meet Ushio's level when he speaks with her. Either way, we get one of the series' most iconic moments, as Ushio agrees to live with him, and revealing that Sanae told her she could cry in her papa's arms. The pair heads back, via Okazuki declaring to his grandmother they'll return. In both versions, we see the pair on the ride home, Okazuki finally agreeing to tell Ushio about her mother. He starts from the very beginning in both versions, detailing every step of the way in the VN, both versions montaging over the now empty backgrounds of where each moment took place. His VN speech has a unique conclusion, focusing on how strong Nagisa was, and how Ushio is the daughter of that strong woman. It's also crazy that this is the one time the VN addresses my criticism and actually shows Okazuki appreciating parts of Nagisa that are, specific to her, as he reflects on how he loved her modesty, how she would sometimes refuse to back down, and how cute her smile was. It's insane to me that this is the first time we see Okazuki think anything like this, loving Nagisa for something specific, something that's not transactional or self-serving. It would have been 100 times more sold in their VN relationship if we saw V and Okazuki express anything similar to this throughout the years he dated and lived with the woman. But in either case, Okazuki begins to break down as he recounts the past, crying for the first time since Nagisa's death, finally accepting it after 5 long years numbing himself. It's a moment the anime absolutely delivers. On my first watch through, it wasn't Nagisa's death that made me cry, it was this scene, and I've heard a lot of people say the same. Nagisa's death is sad, but it's an expected plot point. But the way Okazuki is depicted here, matter-of-factly speaking about Nagisa until it hits him and he feels it, fully recognizes how important those small moments were, and truly accepts they're never coming back, is so immensely relatable to anyone who's lost a loved one, only recognizing how precious the mundane moments spent together were once it's too late to go back. Either way, Ushio snaps Okazuki back to reality. In the anime she's crying as well, but in the VN Okazuki got lost in his own flashback, and Ushio's returned to tell him she went to the bathroom on her own. And just like how the anime had him kneel down to Ushio's level to reflect his change into a proper parent, we get a similar reversal, with Okazuki now finally congratulating her instead of dismissing it. The pair returns home to find Sanae, Okazuki immediately flirting with her in both versions. The anime adds Okazuki and Ushio praying at Nagisa's shrine before he visits her room for the first time, Sanae clarifying they left it unchanged since she left home. She also heavily implies Ushio will be moving in with Okazuki, which, after apologizing and thanking her, Okazuki accepts. V and Okazuki instead immediately demands Ushio back, a little presumptuous after they raised her for 5 years, but of course Sanae agrees. He then similarly visits Nagisa's room, the VN's unchanged familiar background, again providing the reader a taste of the painfully nostalgic experience Okazuki's having. In both versions, Okazuki and Sanae have a similar convo, with Okazuki promising to pay Sanae back for his entire life, only for her to then ask for him to be happy. In the VN, he makes a flirting comment just as Akio enters, resulting in the return of jealousy. We also get some unique details in each version. Anime Sanae drawing a parallel to herself by stating it also took them 5 years to realize what they needed to sacrifice for their daughter. While in the VN, we see Okazuki finally decide he no longer wants to turn back time, because he now has precious things in the present he doesn't want to lose. The meeting concludes with another Okazuki-Akio baseball duel, Ushio hoping her papa gets the dub, despite predicting an Aki victory. But Okazuki gets a home run in both versions, the anime calling back to its added gag in Nagisa Route as he asks Ushio if she saw his hit, before in both versions the fun time ends with the sound of a shattered window. We next get a quiet moment humanizing the Furukawas, as Okazuki awakes that night to see Akio and Sanae quietly discussing how they'd had Ushio to distract them this entire time. Only now does Sanae allow herself to cry for her daughter's death. Sanae's scheme to reunite Ushio and Okazuki is so single-mindedly selfless it stretches credulity, so I appreciate both versions at least acknowledging Nagisa's death affected the two of them as well. We see the impact of this revelation on Okazuki in the VN, as he internally swears he'll be family to the two of them for life. But there's still one person Okazuki needs to repair his relationship with. In the VN, Okazuki helps open the store, then asks Sanae for another favor, to watch over Ushio one last day while he meets up with his father. In the anime, Sanae instead reminds him of this, but smartly has Okazuki take Ushio to his apartment first so we can establish the new status quo. In fact, as normal, the following sequence of events is entirely scrambled in the anime. The VN has Okazuki first visit his dad, followed by Ushio moving in, and him dropping her off at school for the first time, then the return of a certain purple-haired bully, before finally adapting Fuko's return and her visit to the Okazuki residence. The anime instead splits up the Fuko content, adapting Ushio's first day back at school and her moving in with Okazuki first, followed by Fuko's initial reintroduction. Only then do we get Okazuki visiting his dad, capping off the episode, before Kyo is introduced in the following episode, followed by Fuko's house visit. I'd wager it's a change largely motivated by wanting each episode to have a complete arc, but as before, I do like the approach. It feels more natural to have Ushio move in from the start than mix up the various visits. But let's follow the VN for now, starting with Okazuki's reunion with his father, which the anime smartly enhances by having Ushio tag along from the start, focusing on her reaction to the events, eyes wide open at seeing her father now acting as the child in this relationship. But the VN again better incorporates the theme of change, returning us to a familiar background. As Okazuki notes, this is the one place that hasn't changed. The anime shows his childhood home in a more decrepit state than before, but I prefer the VN's approach. It makes thematic sense for his father's house to be a place of total stagnancy, an example of what could have happened to Okazuki if he completely rejected change. His dad's drunk asleep, just as we saw him so many times 7 years ago, and Okazuki notes he'd aged, despite his VN portrait being literally identical, oddly something the anime doesn't bother to correct either. The anime of course inserts Okazuki introducing Ushio here, before in both versions he tells his dad about his trip, about meeting his grandmother, finally snapping his father out of his daze when Okazuki asks if he's tired. Isn't he ready to go back home? Slowly, Naoki realizes his purpose, his duty to raise Tomoya, has already been completed. As mentioned, Ushio's anime inclusion magnifies the moment, as we see her observing Okazuki as he cries. Like Nagisa before, she's drawn to his emotions, but with a sense of childlike wonder. The group next shares a bath, which the VN concludes with another banger line, as Okazuki notes, "My father's back, which always seemed so large in my mind, had grown small at some point." Okazuki sees his father off the next morning, finally accompanied by Ushio and the VN. This is where VN Okazuki introduces the two, and uniquely reveals his father did meet Ushio once, briefly a few days after she was born. We never get any more details, but perhaps it was at the Furukawa's insistence? Seeing the old man interact with Ushio sparks Okazuki's memories, and he flashes back to his childhood, before again doting on his father to live well and seeing him off. Okazuki wondering if he lived a happy life, despite so much of its sacrifice for an ungrateful son. And despite symbolically being sent off to die, I will note Naoki can't canonically be older than his mid-40s. AfterStory again has a kinda depressing view on life. But Okazuki's thought is validated by the apparition of a light ball, which in the anime only Ushio notices. It's a goodbye in two ways, as Okazuki in both versions describes selling off his childhood home to help repay his father's debts, the VN further explaining he's planning to continue working off the rest. But as mentioned, the anime saves this meeting for later, first adapting the following content of Ushio moving in. In both versions, we see Okazuki now dropping Ushio off at school. In another great use of its limited background art, the VN transforms one of its road backgrounds into the preschool gates. It's a cool way to expand our understanding of the town space. The gathered housewives whisper rumors, but Okazuki cheerfully introduces himself, actually explaining his situation in the anime. This gains him some Mad MILF interest, as Okazuki muses he'd have gotten angry in the past, but now doesn't care what others think. The anime also inserts some additional foreshadowing about the identity of Ushio's usual teacher, with Ushio mentioning long hair and drawing a picture of a large boar when she returns home. V and Yoshino chides Okazuki for being too cheerful when he returns to work, the anime instead having Okazuki explain the situation to him, and Yoshino offering the company support if Okazuki needs it, which he takes advantage of in both versions to pick Ushio up after school, dropping her off at the apartment while he returns to finish work. We also see Okazuki fetching the dongos from Nagisa's room, the anime additionally having him bring a picture of Nagisa to watch over them. It also adds Ushio's eyes sparkling as she watches a plane fly over their apartment. Unlike her parents, her ambitions lie beyond this town. The VN instead has an interlude where Ushio asks Okazuki to sing Mama's song, a moment the anime moves to the night before Fuko's visit. And it might come as a surprise that, while Nagisa's theme was in the VN, it was the anime that connected it to the Dango Daikazuku, and created an actual theme song. In the VN there's clearly no real tune when they sing it. It's a little weird to have the tune be both diegetic and non-diegetic, but it's a fantastic decision to give the song an actual identity, especially the way the first ED expanded on it. But I do have to criticize the anime for some transparent tear bait, as it uniquely pans over the picture of Nagisa, and shows Okazuki tearing up, imagining them as a complete family. It's a shame because the VN presents a slightly different, but much more emotionally resonant image, with Ushio being the one to tear up. Okazuki overwhelmed, recognizing this means she does remember one thing about her mother, who repeatedly sung the song to her while she was in the womb. The VN next continues the school plotline, as Okazuki again leaves to drop Ushio off. But as mentioned, the anime first inserts Fuko's reintroduction and the previously discussed home visit. This is also the episode where the anime begins to milk Nagisa's death a little too much, with an added scene of them waving goodbye to Nagisa's picture as they leave. Although we also get a great added sequence of Ushio sneaking out and exploring the town when Okazuki returns to work. She's a precocious one. I also have to call out the new meaning the anime OP now conveys. Nagisa in her uniform fading into the light, a clear reference to how she dies in the VN if you choose to talk to her. We see now empty shots of the school, and the lyrics mention being alone, thinking back on tender moments. Sure, we also get the bevy of character intros, but only now can we realize the entire OP is framed as Okazuki thinking back on his past from this current present after Nagisa's death. It's just all so good. In both cases, Okazuki walks Ushio to school, but is surprised to see her run up to the class pet, a meter-long boar, even larger in the anime. And the boar's owner, Ushio's regular teacher, it's Kyo of course, having fulfilled her goal of becoming a teacher. Her intro is slightly different in each version. In the anime she pokes fun at Okazuki, making a formal intro before breaking out laughing, while in the VN she's surprised and asks if he really is Tomoya, which makes sense given they weren't nearly as close in the VN. We get phenomenal banter in both versions, the two sitting aside to catch up as Kyo mentions Ushio's been happier since the trip, and threatens to reveal Okazuki's embarrassing high school moments to her. In the anime, we instead see Okazuki introduce Kyo as one of Mommy's friends, Ushio's eyes again wide in wonder, a moment that makes sense given the two's closer relationship in the anime. This closer connection does cause a bit of an issue for the anime though, requiring Kyo to quickly mention Sanae asked her not to reveal this connection to Ushio until Okazuki did, and that she and Okazuki's other friends wanted to meet up after Nagisa's death, but could never commit. Suno always seemed ride or die, but especially with the anime's larger friend group, I always found it odd no one checked in with Okazuki during those 5 long years. I understand it wouldn't fit in with the intended narrative arc, but it makes them come off as a bit cold. Although to be fair, if I was barely 2 years out of high school when one of my friends had their wife die in childbirth, I'm not sure I'd be emotionally prepared to offer support either. I also find it interesting how the anime works to characterize Ushio as her own person, adding Kyo commenting that while she's similar to Nagisa, she's much more active. It's a similar trend to the increased humanization the anime provided Nagisa. I wonder if the VN being written entirely from Okazuki's point of view contributed to the VN's side characters feeling less three-dimensional. As a writer, I imagine it'd be difficult to consider other characters' internal complexity when you're exclusively writing from Okazuki's point of view. In both versions, Kyo offers her support as Okazuki leaves, although in the VN she reveals she's still a bit of a tsundere, telling Okazuki not to misunderstand because it's for Ushio's sake, only to follow up and chide Okazuki for not at least misunderstanding a little. Honestly, I find this interaction adorable. Okazuki's clearly not ready for a new relationship, but if it wasn't for the narrative's tragic turn, I think it could have made for a satisfying focus for the remaining episodes. The two's present circumstances presents an incredibly compelling dynamic. Okazuki slowly opening up again and moving past Nagisa, while Kyo has to deal with the emotional complexities of getting with her high school crush, but only after his original sweetheart, her friend, died. Not saying it would have been a better choice in the current ending, but it's an OU I wish got more love. The VN continues with the return of our favorite starfish gremlin, But as mentioned, the anime splits this up, and had Okazuki first run into her immediately after Ushio moved in. In the VN, this encounter begins with Okazuki returning with Ushio to the bakery, finding Akio alone due to Sanae visiting a friend in the park. You have the choice to go investigate. Akio, disappointed Ushio, decides to stick with her dad. The anime skips over this, instead having Ibuki alone call out to Okazuki and Ushio as they pass by the park. V and Okazuki takes pride noting Sanae introduces him as her son-in-law to Ibuki, who in the anime asks about Ushio. The VN smartly has Okazuki ask if the two are already introduced, and Sanae clarifies they haven't met yet, due to Ibuki having just returned from the neighboring town, referencing her conclusion in Tomoyo Route. We then get one of the most subtly painful moments in the entire route, as Ibuki addresses Ushio, clearly trying not to break down in both versions. AfterStory is clearly focused on Okazuki's pain, but I can't imagine how devastating Nagisa's death was to Ibuki, who especially in the VM we learn was one of Nagisa's biggest supporters when she struggled in school. I can't imagine how crushing it would feel to see her finally achieve her goals and graduate after years of struggle, only to suddenly pass away a year later. In the anime, Ibuki calls Fuko over, while in the VN, Okazuki turns upon hearing a loud laugh, noticing Yoshino playing with Fuko. Ibuki then calls them over, and Yoshino's cheery attitude evaporates, commenting that as the serious senpai, Okazuki was the one person he didn't want to catch him acting like that. It's just Ibuki and Fuko in the anime though. It's a shame we never see the full Fuko family together in the anime, especially since Yoshino and Ibuki are married in that version. Via Ibuki also has the adorable comment that she's heard so much about Okazuki from Yoshino, and has been rooting for him this entire time. We heard a similar comment during Yoshino Route, and an embarrassed Okazuki tries to change the subject by patting Fuko's head, which as in the anime is repeatedly denied. Even with the supernatural elements, Fuko's return presents some problems in the anime's continuity. It's nothing immersion-shattering, but I did find it weird during my first watch nothing called back to Tomoyo Route. It's not an issue with the V in separate timelines, but with everything connected in the anime, it's odd neither party recognizes each other or calls back to the wedding Ghost Fuko orchestrated, especially when Tomoyo Route clearly established seeing Fuko restored Okazuki and Nagisa's memories, and the V in Route's ending shows Fuko does remember her ghastly goings-on even after waking up. Granted, the VN also doesn't acknowledge anything, even if Fuko and Okazuki did meet on your canon playthrough before you committed to Nagisa Route, but a couple meetings could have easily been forgotten by Fuko, compared to organizing an entire wedding for her sister. Also, as I mentioned in my last video, the VN actually provides an explanation for Fuko waking, with an unadapted scene during Nagisa or Kimura Route, where Okazuki can choose to pray for Fuko's recovery, spinning a light ball in the process, although it is a little weird his wish took 5 whole years to kick in. Speaking of, Fuko clearly doesn't mind, but her situation's still a little more terrifying than presented. The thought of leaving for your first day of high school, only to suddenly wake up a decade later in your mid-20s, is extremely terrifying. It's also a tiny nitpick I can make about the VN's continuity, since the conclusion of Fuko Route has her instead miraculously awakening just a few months after her ghastly apparition, with seemingly no explanation for why it took another 7 or so years in this continuity. Regardless, Fuko is obsessed with Ushio's cuteness in both versions, while Ibuki explains her situation, providing more details in the VN that Fuko's currently still in rehab, only having recently awoken. Without the anime's connected continuity, her and Yu had still been waiting this entire time to marry, and are only now getting around to it. This leads to an adorably in-character moment, where Sanae convinces Okazuki to yell congratulations at the family as they leave, for the marriage and for Fuko's recovery. He's understandably embarrassed by the prospect of yelling congrats in a park crowded with strangers, but admits the Furukawas have changed him and complies. Everyone claps. We get some more miscellaneous content in the VN, with Ushio adorably sticking close to Okazuki in a transparent attempt to make up for lost time, before we get a quick Ibuki wedding at the school, accompanied by the return of my nemesis, the wedding shawl thrown over a coat look. As mentioned, the anime adapts only this initial meeting at first, then breaks to adapt Okazuki's reunion with his father and Kyo's introduction, before circling back now for Fuko's second appearance. Because in both versions, Fuko's become an Ushio stan and wants to visit, a desire introduced by Yoshino in the anime, while in the VN Sanae calls for Ibuki's sake. Fuko's entry is surprisingly polite in the VN, transparently a script Ibuki gave her, but in both cases quickly pivots to kidnapping Ushio. In both versions, her and Okazuki quickly, and unknowingly, return to their adversarial banter, before Fuko proposes a card game. The VN creates a great gag out of this, as Fuko reveals a bunch of booster packs and starts pulling cards, before Okazuki chides her and she notices it's marked for 10 and up, causing her to fall back on a normal set of playing cards. As they play, Okazuki thinks back to Nagisa, wondering if they'd have family activities like this if she'd survived. Fuko notices, and states it must be because she reminds Okazuki of his late wife. This leads into a cute moment where Ushio recounts the stories she's heard of Nagisa to Fuko, leading to Fuko, like Yoshino and Kyo, offering to help. She of course couches it in wanting to visit Ushio, but surprisingly it seems like a genuine desire to help Okazuki, with visiting Ushio being a secondary benefit. As Fuko leaves, she drops an absurd comment that sets up the epilogue, saying she's memorized Ushio's scent and can now find her anywhere. In both versions, Ushio returns to school, Kyo introducing the upcoming parent v teacher sports day. The VN also has some great cut dialogue, where they laugh about how opposite they've turned out to their high school selves. Kyo's now known for being gentle, and Okazuki's a doting father, which escalates to him hilariously repeating Akio's doting comments post-play about needing to get his daughter's autograph before she becomes famous. Okazuki trains for the sports day in both versions, especially after learning Akio is subbing for a teacher and will be his opponent. The anime also adds an interesting interlude here, with Ushio sneaking out of the apartment to wander town, ending up at the hospital. It's a moment that characterizes her adventurous nature, as well as reinforcing the supernatural connection between her and the hospital Okazuki later theorizes about. We actually saw her make this journey once before in the anime, but this time Fuko runs into her, who Ushio adorably now refers to as Big Sis. But Okazuki's perfect life is shattered once again, with Ushio suddenly falling ill, revealed when she announces she wasn't able to go to the potty on her own. This occurs at the Furukawas in the anime, and is immediately serious, while in the VN it first happens at Okazuki's apartment and it isn't immediately clear she's sick, although VN Okazuki notes that it always happens like this, the same thing that happens each time something exciting is just around the corner. Okazuki stays with her for a day in the VN, then calls Sanae to watch her when he leaves for work the next day, returning to see a doctor had to be called, which the anime cuts directly to. He's obviously unsettled when the doctor reveals it's the same disease Nagisa had, there's no known cause or cure, and requires Akio's words to snap him out of it, who reminds him who Ushio's father is. We again get the anime returning to illusionary world cutaways, with the girl and the robot beginning their desperate walk through the snow, a journey that will soon be mirrored in the real world. In both versions, we next cut to the day of the sports festival, Ushio wanting her father to go and be Aki, but he explains he's here to support her. Weeks pass, but as with Nagisa, Ushio fails to get better, leading to Okazuki quitting his job. In both versions, Okazuki mentions the Furukawas tried to stop him, although it's oddly more gendered in the VN, with only Sanae discouraging him, but he wants to make sure he's with Ushio. The VN again pulls out a great visual, as Okazuki notes how, without noticing, his locker had become full, packed with gifted and customized gear he built up over the years. In both versions, Yoshino doesn't stop him, but trades him a screwdriver, getting Okazuki to promise to return and trade him back. Okazuki stays at home watching over Ushio, the anime again making Okazuki seem less irresponsible by having him at least think about taking her to the hospital, but deciding against it since the doctors clearly didn't know the cause or how to help. But Ushio continues to get noticeably worse, highlighted by some fantastic animation in the anime where Ushio tries and fails to dress herself, confused at her own sudden weakness. Like he did so long ago with Nagisa, Okazuki asks Ushio if she wants anything. She asks to go on another trip, causing heart-wrenching pain and frustration in Okazuki as she insists it has to be now, and he's forced to again and again tell her no. In both cases, Okazuki feels like he wasted the one trip they did have, being such a rotten parent for most of the journey, but Ushio disagrees, confirming it was fun for her. The VN also ties this to Nagisa's pain, Okazuki noting that like with Nagisa, the world is refusing to allow Ushio's one simple wish. Both Okazukis wonder if the town is toying with their family, before swearing to protect Ushio from that same fate, accompanied by a montage of the changing town in the anime. We next see Akio offering Okazuki money. He turns it down due to having some savings, but Akio encourages him to not let his pride get in the way of what's important. This encounter occurs as the two go shopping in the anime, while in the VN, Akio runs into Okazuki while he was headed to the store alone. Either way, they end up at the hospital, Akio's proposal in the VN, while in the anime it's just where the bus stop is. Akio offers Okazuki a cigarette, but Okazuki clarifies he quit. In both cases, Akio calls this out as a smart move, but in the anime this causes him to also put his cigarette back on lit. We next get an exchange expanding on the pair's discussion from when Nagisa was sick. Okazuki notes how people sacrifice nature to build this hospital, wondering what humans will sacrifice next. Akio responds, mentioning they're planning to level a hill to build a new shopping complex, but unlike Okazuki, he focuses on the convenience this will bring to the town's residents. Okazuki's next comment is internal in the VN, but the anime smartly has him speak it out loud to more smoothly fit its medium. In either case, he wonders if Nagisa was connected to this place when Akio brought her here, and if that connection now also applies to her daughter. He questions out loud if change is painful for the town, but Akio disagrees, postulating the town barely notices it. Okazuki wonders if this means we also need to accept death without reaction, but anime Akio replies, noting that it's because people can't accept death that they built this hospital, before in both versions they see nurses congratulating a girl being discharged, a contradiction to Okazuki's view and concrete example of how the hospital, how the town changing, is helping people. Akio ends with the final word, wishing happiness to the town and its people. Okazuki and Akio's discussion, both here and before Nagisa's death, is some of the most thematically interesting content in both versions, and unlike Okazuki's internal search for purpose, I don't dislike that we don't get a concrete conclusion to it. Especially with the anime's added scenes of Ushio visiting the hospital, it's clear Okazuki is onto something. There is a connection between this place and Nagisa, but the choice to make it a hospital in the first place is clearly meant as a contradiction to Okazuki's fears, proving that change isn't always a bad thing. But the anime next lays its cards bare, reusing its unique dramatic theme that kicked in during the lead up to Nagisa's death. Like Okazuki, we can see what's coming next. Okazuki's ragged in both versions, having gone through nearly all his savings and hallucinating snow outside, possibly a side effect of his experience in the illusionary world as the robot. Ushio's worse than ever, in both versions still asking to go on a trip to the flower field. In the anime she insists that it has to be now, and Okazuki breaks, agreeing, which honestly comes off as irresponsible. It's actually Vienna Okazuki whose motivations are more understandable for once, as he's the one who realizes the trip has to be now. It's not entirely rational, but being immersed in his thoughts both now and during the VN's extremely painful lead up to Nagisa's death, you can understand why. With Ushio now also on the brink of death, he's understandably become obsessed with getting her out of the town to save her from Nagisa's fate. It more clearly mirrors Akio's desperate run with Nagisa, and with everything Okazuki's been through, you can empathize with him seeing the town as the cause of Ushio's pain, the thought that leaving is the only thing that can possibly save her, thinking that so long as they reach the train, she'll be safe. Ushio insists on walking by herself, despite her weakness, slowly wilting as they continue. Snow begins to fall, filling Vienna Okazuki with an inexplicable sadness. In the anime, this sadness is of course understood. Ushio uniquely asks him if he likes the snow, and he lies, saying he does, but can't help himself from thinking back to the snowstorm that played a part in Nagisa's death. But Ushio can go on no longer and falls, losing her vision and faintly asking if they're on the train. Now truly powerless, Okazuki does the only thing he can for Ushio and lies, saying they're already on their way, before she goes limp. Like with Nagisa, the anime adds a cliché flashback chronicling Ushio's appearances. Not a criticism, just an observation, before anime Okazuki uniquely begins to desperately call out for Nagisa, for anyone to help them. Having Okazuki call out to Nagisa in his hopeless desperation is another small gem of a detail that conveys how much Nagisa meant to anime Okazuki, how even now she's the one person he instinctively relies on for support when everything else is lost. Vienna Okazuki instead has one last moment to lament how much time he wasted, that they only began to live as father and daughter when they had so little time left together, before his world also goes dark. And now our two worlds converge, as both versions fade back to the girl and the robot, in an identical situation, collapsed in the snow. The anime's decision to spread illusionary world cutaways throughout AfterStory means this parallel narrative is fresher in our mind, but the VN's transition is arguably a more surprising twist due to the illusionary world's recent absence from the narrative. It's here we get that storyline's conclusion, which the anime ingeniously intercuts with Okazuki again grappling with if it had been better if he didn't meet Nagisa in the first place. As I previously mentioned, this internal dialogue instead occurs at the moment of Nagisa's death in the VN. After this illusionary world segment, the VN ends, and you have to replay AfterStory to the point of Nagisa's death to now save her and get the true ending. In either case, the robot and the girl are unable to move, but she can finally hear him, due to the world beginning to fall apart. The girl reveals she's learned she's from the same other world as the robot, but can't leave because she's now tied to the illusionary world. She explains the lights in this world mirror the happiness found in the other world, the real world, and she needs to stay here to shepherd them. She continues to explain that the robot, Okazuki, though we may not have figured that out yet, is unique because he exists in both worlds, that he was one of the many lights, but was able to see her because of their existing bond. She gives some additional exposition in the VN, pointing the player towards the good ending. This is because, unlike the anime's continuity, you still need to collect the balls of light from each side route and make the choice to talk to Nagisa in your subsequent playthrough to reach the true ending. She alludes to this by saying that if Okazuki wants to save someone, he needs to search for the lights. In either case, she reveals Okazuki is going to reawaken in the real world soon, and as sunlight breaks she begins to hum a familiar song. The anime robot suddenly realizes, before both versions are obliterated by the light, and we get her final words, wishing her papa goodbye. In the anime, this is intercut with Okazuki back on the hill, wondering if meeting Nagisa only caused her suffering, silently letting her walk past him. As mentioned, this sequence only occurs in the VN immediately after Nagisa's death, meaning after the aforementioned illusionary world interlude, we're booted back to the main screen, then replay the route through Ushio's delivery to again reach this choice. Both times the VN gives you the choice to reach out to Nagisa, the only difference being that Nagisa dies regardless on your first playthrough. But the anime instead presents this as a more compelling arc, with Okazuki rejecting his decision to meet Nagisa immediately after her death, but now, with the robot's destruction and the return of his memories of color to the world, he realizes he can't, and in one of the most beautiful moments put to animation, doesn't just call out to Nagisa, but runs to her, and wraps her in a hug so tight she goes airborne. And yes, why do you ask? Yamada Naoko does have an episode director credit on this episode. Who else could convey such a compelling moment with just the character's feet? In both versions, this supernatural Nagisa admits she was scared Okazuki might have wished they'd never met, and expresses she was glad he called out, that regardless of what happened, she was happy that she met him. She then asks him to please not regret meeting her before the pair continue up the hill together, the VN adding her asking Okazuki to like the Big Dango family now too, before in the VN she disappears into an abyss of light. But if you've collected all the light balls, Okazuki finds a new light emitting from his hand, embracing him and changing the outcome. This leads into an End of Evangelion live-action sequence in both versions. It's odd and goes on a little long in the VN, but works better in the anime due to them using footage of the actual town the show's backgrounds were based on, instead of random leaves and such. Finally, our surreal excursion ends with Nagisa's line, "Shall I take you to the place where wishes are granted?" Okazuki reawakens, seeing a crying baby, while in the VN he realizes the hand covered in light is now holding on to Nagisa's. There's a moment where he's afraid he simply returned back to Nagisa's death, but this time her eyes are open, she's okay. Finally, fulfilling the home birth discussions, we see Yagi guide Okazuki through giving Ushio her first bath, before Nagisa comments on the beauty outside. Okazuki looks. It's not snow, but balls of light rising up from across the town, and Nagisa gives us the show's conclusion, explaining that because the town's residents love the town, it loves them too, and wants them to be happy, meaning what just happened isn't a miracle, it's expected. Okazuki notes in both versions that all towns, are like one large family. The importance Clannad's been placing on family all series isn't just for your kin, it applies to all communities. This comment alone seems to hint at Nagisa being aware of the supernatural shenanigans that led to their current situation, but V and Okazuki clarifies further, noting that Nagisa always knew this due to her supernatural connection to the town. It's why she can't hate anybody and always works hard for others' sake, because the entire town is family to her. The VN further calls back to her comments in the supernatural void, with Nagisa asking Okazuki to like the Big Dango family now too, only for him to respond that he already loves it, before in both versions they sing. Clannad then reveals its secret emotion-wrenching weapon, as Nagisa's all-too-familiar theme morphs into the achingly beautiful in the palm of a tiny hand. In the VN, this occurs as the credits roll, accompanied by images of Okazuki again making a trip to the flower field, now with a complete family. The anime elevates this conclusion masterfully, instead having the music and montage come in while Nagisa speaks the show's conclusion over it, montaging across the Furukawa's immediate relief, before we get snapshots of Ushio growing up, now surrounded by two loving parents. In an absolutely insane move, this also includes the title shot from the first season's OP, with Ushio running through the field of flowers. We next get a curtain call for the sidecast, using the existing character portraits in the VN, but upgraded in the anime to a fantastic montage of what everyone's up to now. We see Kyo teaching, road or nursing job, which other VN routes also confirm she achieves, Kotomi having been transformed into a total Chad, Sunahara not as much, an older Mei with friends, Tomoyo just standing there being hot I guess, Yoshino with his coworkers, Akio and Sanae continuing their shenanigans, Yukine with the now unified gangs, the choir girls, my god they were roommates, Misai and her cat, Kimura, before both versions end on Ushio waving to her great-grandmother, now accompanied by both parents. Before, as promised, the final shot is of Okazuki as a child visiting the flowers with his father, an exact mirror of the second season's first image. We then get a somewhat confusing epilogue in both versions, with Ibuki and Fuko going to the hospital for Fuko's regular checkup. Oddly, the anime chooses this rather meaningless conversation to adapt word for word. We get a characterizing moment for Fuko, as she switches from insisting she's fine and fighting against the checkup to charging ahead towards it once she realizes it will prevent her sister from worrying about her, before she detects a familiar smell, meaning like Misai's cat, Fuko apparently retains some memories between timelines. She rushes off to find the girl she smells, promising the fun has just begun. Both versions keep it ambiguous as to if she's smelling normal Ushio, foreshadowing their friendship restarting, or if this is Otherworld Ushio, somehow also having escaped her fate of being trapped in the illusionary world forever. The final title screen, of Otherworld Ushio sleeping under a tree, seems to hint at this version of events, although the anime subverts it by also showing normal Ushio sleeping under the tree. It's also worth pointing out, this shot of Fuko looking for Ushio, literally one of the last images in the entire series, is also from the first season's OP, 40-something episodes earlier. KyoAni certainly delivers on their reputation for planning ahead. So that's Clannad. I'm not here to explain or litigate the ending. You can find countless other discussions on that, but while some elements of it may have been narratively unsatisfying, I find it a perfect conclusion to the themes the series has been establishing throughout its entire run. And to me it was the right choice. It's better to have a work pay off on its narrative arcs and present a coherent message than have a watertight plot but nothing interesting to say. It's also worth emphasizing how the time travel mechanics are easier to swallow in the VN, because mechanically it's exactly what you've been doing all game, looping back in time and making different choices, fixing your mistakes. The anime's connected timeline makes it feel like more of an ass pull, but the writers knew that, hence Kotomi's added exposition about the illusionary world before Ushio's birth. In terms of what the anime chose to adapt, AfterStory displays the most two-sided approach of any route, cutting huge swaths of the VN's early narrative while adapting the most important sequences nearly one-to-one. It shows KyoAni knew what moments would resonate, and poured all their effort into adapting those sequences, with as much time and care as possible, time they obtained by skipping any content not related to this core narrative. But while it may have been necessary, it's also the anime's biggest loss, because playing through VN AfterStory, I was surprised to find so much more than the tragic story of Nagisa's death and Okazuki's reunion with his daughter. Without any strict episode count or runtime limit, the VN is able to convey Okazuki and Nagisa's slow transition into independent adults as a series of mini-arcs, allowing us to sit with and follow along as they struggle and adapt to each new phase of life. It's a core element of VN AfterStory's first half that's lessened in the anime, which instead jumps directly from one plot point to the next. The wholesale removal of the VN's cohabitation arc in the anime is the most notable example of this. Even on my first watch, Nagisa and Okazuki moving in together seemed rushed. You'd expect it to be a company with significant relationship development. No longer are the two simply dating, but married and living together. But it skipped by so fast, with Nagisa's pregnancy in the next arc kicking off at the end of the very same episode. There's so much development and nuance to the couple's relationship lost in the anime, from the pair legitimately discovering and developing their own adorable physical love language, to vowing to rely only on each other, and slowly discovering what that means. It not only makes the relationship more dynamic and believable, but provides so much thematic weight to all the struggles they face in their initial year together trying to mature into adults. My favorite of these cut moments is the throwback to the couple's childish hand-holding contest from Nagisa Route when Okazuki returns to his childhood home, now needing to rely on that same hand for the strength to face his father. It's a fantastic cut moment in isolation, but also displays how their relationship has strengthened and matured from high school, something the anime implies but never gives concrete examples of. And speaking of, the loss of this meeting between Okazuki and his father is the other thing I'm saddest didn't make the anime's cut. For one, it narratively sets up Naoyuki being jailed and Okazuki's subsequent outburst, making the sudden loss of his job offer feel more natural and less of a narrative contrivance. But more importantly, it's where Naoyuki's perspective, and his relationship with his son, is actually fleshed out. Without this meeting, Okazuki's relationship with his father is something he's mostly told us about instead of something we've seen firsthand, meaning we don't have a good understanding of their existing relationship when Okazuki confronts his grandmother and finds his perspective challenged. It's clear that from the start, KyoAni decided that, for whatever reason, they didn't have the time or space for this encounter, so added an additional meeting between Okazuki and his father after Nagisa's play in the first season, as well as a handful of additional conversations where Nagisa encourages Okazuki to see his father throughout AfterStory. It's nowhere near a complete replacement, but prevents his jailing and subsequent rehabilitation from coming totally out of the blue, although I still found his character lacking on my first watch-through. Okazuki's return home with Nagisa is the only time Naoyuki speaks enough to really convey how he feels about his current circumstances, and allows us to understand and empathize with him. Without it, his redemption and the ending's greater themes of fatherhood fall somewhat flat. Besides these moments, other cuts were less of a loss, although it's sad to lose out on so much great slice-of-life content. If the anime didn't give you enough, I'd absolutely recommend picking up the VN. Akio and Sanae Route are fine. They have some great moments and legitimately compelling development for the otherwise overly perfect couple, but even in the VN they feel underbaked. Great potential hampered by legitimately odd and uninteresting plotlines. That said, I do have a soft spot for Okazuki finding himself in the old man's role during Akio Route. Recognizing the maturity and responsibility Akio hides under his childish persona, and deciding he too needs to grow into that kind of adult. The cuts to Yoshino Route are also not missed. There's a handful of fun sequences left out by the anime, but it includes the most important moments. But it's unfair to only talk about what the anime cut. I also have to emphasize just how much life the anime's animation and attention to detail adds to everything it touches. The VM plot is much more detailed, but progresses in a segmented manner arc by arc. We first focus on Nagisa's return to school, before that's entirely dropped to focus on Okazuki's difficulties with his new job, before that's entirely dropped for the next arc. It's not a bad format, and does allow for some more complete tonal arcs, but the anime shuffling some of these moments around helps create a more fluid and believable narrative, where there's more than one topic relevant at a time. It also smartly fixes some additional plot holes, namely justifying Nagisa's home birth, and adds some additional setup that helps the most emotional moments pay off even harder than in the VN. But more than that, there's the indescribable way their animation conveys character and emotion. No matter how well the VN wrote Ushio, the media means there's simply no way she has as much impact as her animated incarnation. Part of it is inherent to animation, how movement breathes life into previously static characters. But so much more is KyoAni's genius at displaying subtle interactions and emotions, operating at a level few studios can, and making Clannad's characters feel, well, real. But this is all a prelude to discussing the anime's largest cuts and its most impactful change, removing both the complexities and the darkness at the heart of Okazuki's character and the work as a whole. This is legitimately fascinating content lost in translation. Okazuki's internal struggles with change and purpose creates a nuance and depth unmatched in the anime. But as mentioned, I also find it unsatisfying and poisonous to the VN's themes as a whole. To start, let's discuss another mindset core to the VN's worldview, largely cut from the anime: the misogyny. Not only has Okazuki changed to be much less of an objectifying dick towards Nagisa, making his character noticeably more likable, it removes his obsession about finding purpose through being a stereotypical masculine protector. It's not that there's no moments of V and Okazuki showing genuine care for Nagisa, but as discussed, it's hard to ignore the sheer preponderance of text where he ignores her wishes to push his ideal version of the relationship, or focuses on how he uses her as a motivating factor to give his life purpose. For instance, note how he pushes back when Nagisa tries to help, when moving in or when she wants to also get a job. She, understandably, wants to help the relationship as an equal, but Okazuki needs to be the protector in the relationship to feel he has a purpose, needs Nagisa to be haplessly reliant on his support to sustain his self-image and feel like his life has meaning. Compared to the anime, which lacks these details, it makes Okazuki's interest in the core relationship of the series appear more mechanically self-serving than a genuine emotional partnership. But maybe you're not convinced this is intentional, or I'm being overly critical. That's fine. We'll just have to show how this mindset isn't isolated to Nagisa Route or AfterStory, but the VN as a whole. Because there's no better example of both the VN's backwards worldview, where relationships aren't something to be protected, but are instead formed to allow a man to have something to protect, to convince him his life has purpose, as well as how bleak and vacuous that worldview really is, than the VN's very own ppei route. That's right, we're finally discussing the character entirely purged by the anime. Ppei Route is weird. One of the mandatory arcs required to unlock AfterStory, it focuses on the titular airheaded boy, a vagabond who's recently graduated high school and works his way into Okazuki's friend group. Given its infamy, I was surprised to find myself enjoying the route on my first playthrough, especially when, in a twist, it begins to focus on a non-Okazuki romance between Ppei and Ro. Given how poor Ro's treatment was in her sister's route, it seemed a nice consolation prize. How foolish I was then, for Clannad would never do anything kind for Ro. Even as the route's main conflict appeared and it moved into its final act, I was engaged, my anticipation growing as it appeared to ramp up towards a legitimately thematically impactful ending. This kicks off with Kappei's sudden admittance into the hospital, where he reveals he has a terminal disease that can't be solved without a double leg amputation. To him, running has been everything, the one thing he derived meaning from throughout high school, and a life where he can't at least carry himself on his own 2 feet is one not worth living. And it was here I predicted where the conclusion was going. Because Suno and Okazuki are nearly identical parallels, both having put so much of their self-worth into sports they ended up being ripped away from, but being able to move past that and, especially in Mei's route, find meaning in other ways, in their friendship and antics. I grew even more confident in my prediction as Yoshino appeared, in a shocking connection revealing Kappai was one of the orphans he visited as a rock star. Now regretfully told him to focus everything towards one goal or dream, a mindset Yoshino's now grown to realize was destructive. It's the perfect setup. Yoshino's already lived this conflict. He too fell into a dark place losing his dream, but was able to continue on and build a new life past it. Now it's time for him to right his wrongs, and help Kappai do the same, supported by our main duo who are living through nearly identical, if not as extreme, circumstances. It's a satisfyingly thematic conclusion about how you shouldn't tie all your self-worth to just one thing, and how meaning can be found past loss and trauma. But we know better now. We know Clannad doesn't truly believe you can derive meaning from that sort of thing. Because Yoshino fucks off, saying friendship isn't enough, and what convinces Kappai he has a reason to live is Ro, his girlfriend of a few months at most, threatening to rape him, so he'll be abandoning his unborn child if he lets himself die. I do not know why the VN constantly does Ro dirty. Girl cannot catch a break. Given the VN's gender politics, I do not believe it's a coincidence the most sexually forward girl is also the only one who can canonically date someone besides the MC, and is also the only main girl to not get a proper route. I could write an entire follow-up video on how the VN, not so subtly, hates Ro. Regardless, this plea works, and Kappai decides that if she needs him that much, if he has a, largely hypothetical, family that loves him so much, he'll need to live, and we get our light ball. I've cursed you with this information because it's the most appallingly naked example of the VN's perspective on meaning and family. Of all the myriad reasons one could present for why a 19-year-old kid should value life, the only answer it can provide is that he'd be failing in his duty towards his high school girlfriend of 3 months and their imaginary family. It's an answer that devalues any other purpose in living, that ignores any value in platonic relationships, shoving aside Kappai's friends and mentor who, unlike Ro, have suffered similar circumstances and moved past them. It narrows the breadth of human experience by presenting high school sports and having a GF is the only 2 reasons someone could possibly want to live. Honestly, a pretty insulting perspective for any player who is A, single, and B, not a sports star. But more than that, it reveals what Clannad ultimately means when it says family. Clannad isn't interested in emotional bonds or relationships between family members. The Route is entirely uninterested in the substantive nature of Ryo and Kappai's romance, and they have 0 chemistry. It's the mere idea of being in a relationship that restores Kappai's will to live. The fact their kid is entirely hypothetical only drives the point home. And it's this unchallenged perspective permeating the VN which sours me on VN AfterStory's depth. We get added complexity and exploration into Okazuki's values and motivation, but the conclusion, that the most important relationships in Okazuki's life are internally superficial and self-serving, lessens my investment in the story and dulls the emotional impact of his arc. Realizing that Akio, Yoshino, and Tomoyo's heart-wrenching speeches about the value of family and human connection is ultimately indifferent to any indescribable or emotional value we gain from relationships, but boils down to the bare benefit of fitting into stereotypical family roles, it sours those moments' emotional sting. It's a depressingly bleak worldview that sees no inherent value in human existence outside those strict family roles, and only the most superficial existence for those who do live within its bounds. Once you realize this is the VN's perspective, you can find it everywhere. It's why Okazuki's overcome with existential dread and sees his life as hopeless if he doesn't have a girl by his side. It's in the way Okazuki and Nagisa never bother mentioning friends, hobbies, or ambitions after graduating. How Nagisa's interest in theater has to disappear the moment she leaves the confines of high school and enters the real world. How Okazuki never makes any meaningful connection with his coworkers, including Yoshino, and fails to find purpose in or outside his work. It's simply accepted that part of being a man is suffering through work to support your waifu. You can't find purpose in your job, but neither can you want to leave it and seek out a better existence. But more than that, it's in how Akio and Sanae are punished for having goals after high school outside of the strict family structure. How every couple in Clannad hooks up with their first high school crush and pops out a kid they devote the rest of their life to before they're 20. Why now Yuki returns home to die despite barely being 40. It's how Tomoyo's backstory never bothers to justify why her parents shouldn't divorce. It can't imagine a world where healthy adults recognize splitting up is better for everyone. The family structure has to be maintained above all else, to the point her brother attempting to kill himself is framed as a positive action. And while it's interesting to note the rare aspects of Clannad that contradict this viewpoint, how, despite their claim, Akio and Sanae have clearly found purpose in their new life outside of Nagisa, with the cram school and Akio's neighborly tendencies, or Misai's ability to find value outside of a relationship by helping the dorm's residents, or just like Fuko's entire existence. The most fascinating impact of this revelation is noticing how the anime went out of their way to alter or remove the examples I mentioned above. Not only is the sexism and diatribes about purpose and being a provider removed, we see subtle but intentional additions. Akio and Sanae drop small comments showing that having a family isn't diametrically opposed to personal fulfillment. Ushio's genesis has changed to come from a moment of marital happiness, not jealousy. Tomoyo's backstory divorce gets an added custody dispute that provides at least some reason as to why their family should stay together. Even Misai gets an added comment about moving on and finding purpose, outside her single high school romance. And together, this communicates an intangible humanity that the VN lacks, where people are allowed to enjoy and pursue life, not solely speedrun their way into strict, unchallenged social roles. It's a humanity enhanced by other aspects of the anime's writing. VN Nagisa is a fantastic character, but she's often written in a way that reduces her to a vessel for the reader's wish fulfillment or as a thematic foil for Okazuki during AfterStory. She's a perfectly loyal fawning waifu, with literally zero romantic experience or interest in other men until she falls in love with the MC at first sight. When Vi and Okazuki is bogged down by fear in the pregnancy arc, she acts as a perfect thematic foil, unwaveringly advocating for Ushio's birth without once thinking about her own safety. And this detracts from her character's believability and relatability. In contrast, the anime goes to great pains to display Nagisa's humanity, removing the indulgent wish fulfillment and constantly adding small moments of Nagisa having doubts, hesitations, and interiority. Anime Okazuki too is allowed to be a person outside his patriarchal role, someone who's genuinely smitten for his partner outside of any mechanical justification, and who's afraid of losing her, not because of some diatribe about purpose, but simply because he doesn't want to lose someone he loves. And the combined effect of these changes is that the characters and relationships are more likable, feel more real, and we're more invested in them when the big emotional moments hit, elevating their impact instead of distracting from them. I cared more about anime Nagisa and was more impacted by her death because she's written as a believable person in tragic circumstances, not as a plot point in Okazuki's thematic search for purpose. And it's interesting how this is partially accomplished by removing the depth and complexity of the original, cutting back on thematic and narrative complexity to allow the human emotion to better shine through. Although that's not to say it doesn't also benefit from the anime's fantastic added character writing and KyoAni's phenomenal animation. It's hard to concretely explain, but this one interaction, this one moment between Okazuki and Nagisa, does so much more to invest me in their characters and relationship than 100 pages in the VN. It's a true testament to KyoAni's genius that they could take Okazuki's fears and values, something the VN spends thousands of words mechanically discussing, and convey it so convincingly, so resonantly, all in this one small scene. So with an understanding of the VN's worldview, and how the anime's subtle alterations subvert it, I want to make a case study using the arc where I finally realized these changes were both intentional and motivated. How even small changes can entirely alter a story's meaning and tone, and produce a diametrically different conclusion, despite not changing the plot. I'm of course talking about the one-episode OVA adapting Tomoyo Route. Even ignoring all the changes I'm about to discuss, this episode is surprisingly competent. It returns to high school to adapt the alternate timeline of Tomoyo Route, somehow managing to cram an entire route into one episode. It's a near impossible task. KyoAni's similar one-episode OVA of Kyo Route demonstrates the expected result, but in this case they actually pull it off, smartly utilizing our existing familiarity with the first half of Tomoyo Route, woven throughout episodes 17 and 18, to jump directly to the heart of the conflict. But what first inspired my crack theory was the small but meaningful changes the anime made, which entirely reframe the route's ending. This may be my most controversial take. I despise Tomoyo Route. Nothing against the girl herself, but its latter half displays the most retching examples of the VN's dehumanization and unintentionally bleak worldview presented as a happy ending. From the start, we see the same relationship dynamics I discussed in prior routes, with Okazuki using Tomoyo largely for his own benefit, physical titillation in this case, while outwardly objecting to her goal of becoming student council president, since her winning the election means she'd represent the authority our delinquent MC hates or something. This largely mirrors Okazuki's perspective towards the play in Nagisa Route, showing Okazuki's interest is centered on wanting to have a GF to hang out and make out with, while he ignores and even opposes her desires and ambitions. And it's a detail that anime immediately flips on its head, with its first scene showing Okazuki psyched at his girlfriend's electoral success, not only accepting it, but pushing her further, reminding her of her goal to save the sakura trees. For just a single change, this already depicts the relationship as a much deeper emotional partnership, with anime Okazuki actually invested in his girlfriend's feelings and wants, instead of viewing them as an obstacle to his ideal relationship. In both versions, we begin to see how dating a delinquent is hurting Tomoyo as student council president, with a blood-boiling series of encounters where everyone, including literal teachers and Okazuki himself, tell Tomoyo he's only holding her back. A dehumanizing conflict, as none of the characters, nor the VN itself, seems to care what Tomoyo wants for herself. This leads to Okazuki breaking up with her in both versions, totally ignoring her wishes, but not wanting to hold her back or prevent her from saving the sakura trees. Following the breakup, VN Okazuki spends the rest of his school year indulgently depressed, wasting away with Sunahara and moping that Tomoyo lives a life separate to them. It's the second development that boils my blood. Just as the VN never entertains the thought of, I don't know, anyone genuinely asking Tomoyo what she wants instead of making decisions for her, the VN is cosmically disinclined to ever consider Okazuki could shape up and meet Tomoyo's level, to actually improve himself or change any of his Slavic behavior, to do even the bare minimum work to pursue or support the girl he supposedly loves. Instead, Okazuki wastes the school year away, content to say he once dated an impressive person, not even starting the job search until Sunahara does. And so, he finds himself in the situation he fearfully described in AfterStory, still stuck in his hometown with no friends, no family, and no hobbies or ambitions. Lucky for him, Tomoyo reappears, explaining she saved the sakura trees but regrets sacrificing so much time with the person she even now loves. Okazuki again repeats they're destined for different places, but Tomoyo throws it all away to be with him and Okazuki gets his happy ending. I promise I'm not trying to be an ass and criticize true love conquers all as a trope, but this is a categorically awful scenario. Nothing has changed about Okazuki's shitty, ambitionless life, except he now has a submissive housewife to come home to, a woman who threw away every aspect of her life and personality, the things that made her, her, to become a deadbeat sex maid. I'm not denying there's an aspect of romantic sacrifice here, but be honest with yourself. How would you react if you heard about an ambitious, successful, popular, well-liked high school girl who after graduating immediately throws away all her scholarships and opportunities, stops talking to all her previous friends, and shacks up with an older deadbeat boyfriend? It's not exactly a positive scenario. So despite being framed as a happy ending, I shouldn't have to explain how existentially depressing this conclusion is. It's so mired in sexist gender roles that both sexes suffer for it. Tomoyo's forced to sacrifice her entire personality, including the very determination that pulled Okazuki and saved the sakura trees, in order to fit into the stereotypical housewife role. While as a man, Okazuki is depicted as absolutely incapable of taking any agency in his life, except to mope around until a girl falls into his lap. It again highlights how shallow the VN's worldview is, presenting a happy ending because Okazuki now has a waifu and can feel like a man, even if he did nothing to earn it, and both of them now have literally nothing else to motivate them in life, except the inherent satisfaction of fitting into their proper roles of provider and subservient. And what proves my reading is that the anime also realizes this, and with a small twist, reframes the entire conclusion. Because instead of exclusively wallowing in self-pity and putting in zero effort after the breakup, anime Okazuki pushes himself to continue to wake up on time, even without Tomoyo's morning visits. He shows up to class, even if that mostly involves struggling to stay awake, submits his classwork, and puts in the effort to properly graduate and find a job. So despite being in the same situation as his VN counterpart when Tomoyo confronts him after graduation, him stuck at a low-end job in this town, while she can reach further, higher positions, it's no longer fatalistic. Unlike VN Okazuki's mopey and hopelessness, anime Okazuki speaks with a humble pride, explaining how after the breakup he learned to wake up on time, make his own lunches, went to class, and struggled with interviews. It's still in stark contrast to Tomoyo's blinding success, but it shows he's doing what the VN never acknowledged as a possibility, realizing he can put in effort to actively shape his life and better himself, and anime Tomoyo acknowledges his hard work. So when anime Tomoyo similarly throws away everything to be with Okazuki, it's not a one-sided transaction. As she frames it, it's an act of rejecting the standards and expectations others put on her to pursue what's important to her. This not only resolves my aforementioned frustration at her lack of agency, but creates a more believable and downright romantic conclusion, where instead of desperately throwing everything away so Okazuki will accept her as a submissive housewife, it's an act of rejecting the values others have burdened her with to be with the one she truly loves. Similarly, anime Okazuki actually putting in the work to meet her halfway following the breakup gives him actual agency in the reunion, and is an infinitely more romantic gesture, showing why Tomoyo would still be in love with him, instead of the VN's wish fulfillment where she gives up everything to return to the world's mopiest man. But more important is how these relatively small changes by the anime result in a starkly different tone on relationships and life. In the VN, Tomoyo can't just get back with Okazuki, she has to sacrifice everything, promising to do all the housework and let Okazuki make all the decisions, begging for him to take her back, finally breaking into tears and the two embracing when he agrees. But in the anime, this same tearful embrace isn't kicked off by a transactional sacrifice, but by Okazuki's embarrassed admission that while he's a little late, he'll work to come to her too. And by doing so, it presents a world where relationships aren't superficial and transactional, but one where people can be inspired and uplifted by their relationships, where love isn't throwing away every other aspect of your personality to fit into strict predefined social roles, but where people can mutually strive towards and support each other, inspiring and encouraging their progression through life, where it's actively worth changing and pursuing goals, and where effort, no matter how humble, is admirable and worthwhile. And in a microcosm, it's how small, almost missable changes made by the anime were able to fundamentally alter the meaning and message of Clannad. How, even with the same plot and characters, Clannad's anime was able to say something all its own. So after all this analysis, that's what I'm left with. My conclusion isn't that the anime is strictly better. I love sinking my teeth into the VN's messy complexities, as much as I adored the anime's more believable characters and striking emotional resonance. It's appropriate because each work succeeds in a way its medium best supports. The VN's uninterrupted access to Okazuki's thoughts and monologues facilitates internal complexity in a way animation doesn't, while KyoAni's fantastic animation supports its more naturalistic characters, the longing beauty it conveys with every moment emphasizing its focus on the inherent value of life and relationships. I also won't attempt to diagnose where the version's differing worldviews came from, if it's simply a creative difference, or if you could tie it to Japan's historical work cultures or patriarchal values. It'd be a fascinating investigation, but I'm woefully uninformed to even approach that, outside of simply noting the difference, and how, for whatever cultural influence you could attribute to the VN's worldview, the anime was also produced by that same culture a mere 3 years later. Ultimately, I spoiled the conclusion to this video in the first episode of this series. While the above tonal changes means I resonate more with Clannad's anime, I love both versions, and can absolutely see why anyone might prefer one over the other just based on what they vibe with. Both works have different strengths and weaknesses, and I heartily recommend any fan of one to give the other version a try. The characters and themes may not be perfectly consistent, but the breadth of the VN complements the anime's polish fantastically as companion pieces. And well, that's all I have for this comparison. I started planning this project literally years ago, first to satiate my own curiosity when I couldn't find any existing comparisons, then later to write my thoughts down and exercise them from bouncing around my head. I genuinely had no expectation of getting even a single view or comment, so I deeply appreciate anyone who's watched this far, as well as anyone who's left comments sharing feedback or their perspective on this work we all love. There's still some bits of Clannad I haven't touched on, notably the one episode adaptation of Kyo's Route and some VN exclusive Common Route occurrences, not to mention the OVA that adapts moments from the follow-up VN, Clannad Side Stories, although the Google release date still confuses me as to which came first. But my interest from the start has been on the adaptation process, so as much as I'd love to rant about my dislike for Kyo Route's melodrama, I'd basically just be describing the VN content. Even KyoAni can't adapt a full route in one episode without any prior setup. Throughout this project I've come to enjoy the process of creating and editing videos, so I may continue to release videos on this channel, but this is likely to be the conclusion of this comparison series. Anything in the future may well be totally unrelated to Clannad or anime in general. So if you're here exclusively to learn about Clannad, you have my heartfelt thanks for sticking around so long. Feel free to smash that unsubscribe button, and I wish you the best of luck on your own journey up that long, long hill.